Early winter had settled in. Around a weathered tavern at the edge of the city, the elmwood beams and pillars had aged into tones of dark amber and charcoal. The moisture from the East Sea monsoons lingered in the air, feeding the crackling central hearth whose damp firewood sparked and hissed with every burst of flame. The scent of salt and sea clung to the greasy leather greaves, and steel tools gleamed with a dangerous luster. Scarred, battle-worn men filled the space. Bullet holes riddled their clothes, savage cuts crossed their skin, and the flicker of fire danced in their hard, defiant eyes. The tavern staff trembled. Women wept silently behind their sleeves. The tavern owners stood pale and frozen. The patrons had fled. All knew the reputation of the BlackSail pirate group, infamous outlaws of the East Coast, now conducting their business. Captain Liss, their leader, lived by 3 principles. It was these rules that had kept him alive for a decade in a foreign world, despite lacking any modifiers or understanding of the native tongue. First principle, appear vicious. Whether or not you are, people need to believe it. His weapon of choice, a bloodstained chain mace. Iron shells capped its wooden grip, from which dangled 2 spiked iron balls the size of half a man's head. That was for underlings. His primary weapon, however, rested beside him, a massive war hammer with spike-like chisels on its back. Liss had named it Frost Rhododendron Blood-Crying, a poetic name for a tool of destruction. His style was a spectacle in itself. A long braided beard, hair spiked like steel quills, and a scar wide enough to nearly split his face in 2. His light leather cuirass and dark-toed boots completed the image of a man no one dared cross. With interest and fees, you owe me 17 golden dragons. He leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, the chain mace resting heavily on the table. The BMA Duchy, long since conquered and made a province of the Aran Empire, used the imperial monetary system. 1 golden dragon equaled 200 silver coins, and each silver was worth 50 copper. 17 dragons was a fortune, enough to buy a home in a border town. The tavern owner trembled. 17. Hurry up, Liss said casually. I'm patient, but my friends aren't. Second principle, don't work alone. Fear is more convincing in numbers. 2 of his most intimidating crew stood behind him. Shark Ox, the 2.8-meter merfolk helmsman, looked carved from muscle and stone. His torn dorsal fin and light blue scarred skin told stories of violence. His weapon, a door-sized broadsword. Rain the werewolf, a 2.4-meter wall of snarling brutality, stood wrapped in a dark red coat stretched by raw muscle. His silver-furred face bore unbrushed tangles and a permanent snarl. He wielded clawed arm guards and lived for pain, especially other people's. Rain pulled out a dagger. This is poisoned, made by an alchemist. He grinned, tongue slick with saliva, hissing onto the wooden floor. The tavern owner stammered. Haven't even licked it yet. Rain chuckled darkly, dragging his claw along the table. The screech sent a fresh wave of terror through the room. Liss sighed. The mood was breaking. Ox, ever the quiet one, was guzzling beer by the barrel. 20 mugs in minutes. Liss twitched. Free drinks, and you act like peasants. Intimidate, not indulge. With a dramatic breath, Liss stood. All right, either pay or... He walked over, shut the beer tap, and shattered a high-proof alcohol barrel with his chain mace, splashing liquor across the floor. Ox and Rain got the message. They each broke open more barrels, spreading alcohol like wildfire. Rain doused the tavern owner. Or we burn this place to the ground, Liss said, striking a lantern. The man collapsed, sobbing, as his wife cried even harder. Rain muttered his favorite nonsense spell, Great God, activate. Ox kept drinking, calm and detached. Liss's third principle was clear. Third principle, never oppress the helpless. Power was for profit, not cruelty. His men were outlaws, but not fools. The debt had a source. A ledger, stolen by their shipwright, Shotti, a dark elf genius who had infiltrated the underground bank. Every name they visited owed money. Liss offered to settle the debts for half the amount. 17 dragons is a lot, Liss said, his voice softer. You borrowed 8. 30% interest each month doubled. but I'm a fair man. Bring me 5, and we walk away. They had already collected over 70 dragons from similar ventures. And Shotti? With 4 more from their crew, he was probably looting the bank vault as they spoke. Liss lit the lantern, his expression calm. Tick-tock. What's it going to be? London City, one of the major seaports on the East Coast, thrived on its extensive trade routes. To support this prosperity, its roads were paved with sturdy stone slabs, a far cry from the muddy trails of inland provinces. These highways stretched like arteries, connecting the surrounding regions and supporting the constant flow of goods. Wine inns dotted the path, offering rest to merchants and mercenaries alike. Of course, convenience brought chaos. The road swarmed with peddlers, runners, and opportunists. With trade came easy prey, and crime followed naturally. The BlackSail pirate group had carved its place within this ecosystem, professionally, one might say. The early winter breeze had already turned cold. The sun sat high at noon, painting dappled shadows on the stone road through fluttering leaves. It was a serene, almost poetic scene, until 3 looming figures broke the calm. Liss walked at the head, a sack of coin in hand, bound for the inn where they were scheduled to regroup. The rendezvous was about 30 minutes ahead. He would have preferred mounts, but given oxen range size, they'd burned through horses by the pair. Beasts like marcher hippogriffs or land lizards were powerful, but painfully expensive. It wasn't worth it. As he walked, Liss tallied the take. The latest wine in and collected debts had netted them 79 golden dragons. Ox, towering and grim, carried his massive 300-pound greatsword across his back. In one hand, he held a sack nearly the size of a human head, stuffed with 700 to 800 errant silver coins. Golden dragons were rare. Not every debtor paid in the high denomination. A bountiful harvest indeed, Rain remarked, sauntering along empty-handed. Bored, he snapped off a tree branch with a flick of his claw. Liss counted silently, his face unmoved. 79 golden dragons sounded like a fortune, but once split 10 ways between the crew, deducted for ship maintenance, docking fees, sea supplies, bribes to the London sheriff, and recruitment for lost crewmates. There wasn't much left. Damn it, when does the main storyline start? This side quest crap is getting old, he muttered, tossing the coin bag to Rain. Everyone had dreams, but 7 years ago, reality had forced Liss into the sea and a life of piracy. You say that, Rain grinned, but the BlackSail pirate group is a flourishing, self-made business. Our tale is set on the east coast of the western continent. You play the part of a gutter rat scraping by, meeting freaks and monsters with weird talents, only to die in the streets and rot in the woods. Liss gave him a side-eye. Rain's twisted way of narrating things could be entertaining in small doses. Can you not jinx us? Say something hopeful for once. Ox glanced at them, growing accustomed to Liss' strange vocabulary over the years. Main storyline? Like what? Liss smirked. Like meeting a runaway princess, helping her reclaim her throne, marrying her because she's drop-dead gorgeous, or uncovering an evil organization aiming to conquer the western continent, crushing it, getting knighted by the emperor, or better yet, taking the throne myself. Also, did I mention I'm an inventor? Yes, the college gaming memories. Steam engines, the Industrial Revolution, fusion, starships, immortality, reality check. This world had strict laws of physics. Mechanics and thermodynamics still applied. And while power systems existed, they were varied and vague. Some, like the Iron Sword King, were pure brute force, able to cleave men in two with waves of energy. Liss had never seen one in person, but he imagined the worst. Still, what if 10 lunatics from BlackSail ambushed you? Poisoned you? Took hostages? Power wasn't everything. Ox, for example, could bisect 3 armed men with a casual swing. The results were always gruesome. Magicians existed, sure. Most were useless, glorified conmen. But rare ones were terrifying. 10 years ago, Liss encountered such a sorcerer. That disaster had everything to do with how he ended up in this world. One of his crew, a low-level demon, had a tale almost as strange as Liss. Liss had discovered him marooned on a deserted island. The demon claimed to be part of the demon god Agar's Dagon's expedition force, but had been sucked through a dimensional rift. Liss once believed it signaled a grand quest. Turned out the demon was a dud. Red skin, curled horns, built like a horror story, but more skilled in woodworking and tailoring than warfare. He worked alongside Shotti the Dark Elf as a shipwright. If he had any real strength, it was his regenerative ability. Severed limbs regrew in 10 days. He could survive on no food, though it left him weak as a kitten. Ox looked at Liss like he had two heads. Reclaiming a kingdom? Evil conspiracies? You lead an outlaw crew, boss. Rain was about to add something when Liss cut in. Enough rambling. Let's get to the inn. If the others haven't wrapped things up, we'll pay the underground bank a visit. This haul was just to cover operational costs. The real prize was still waiting in the vault. Mess that up, and everything else would mean nothing.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
You freeze your kidneys in the cold northern nights, while I'm down south in the blazing sun, killing like grass under a scythe. Liss twisted the lyrics, hoping the stash in the underground bank's vault had grown. If they had 300 golden dragons, they could live lavishly for at least half a year, indulging in the pleasures of Heavenport. Please, stop with your hometown dialect. Rain couldn't take it anymore, the distaste in his voice thick enough to make one cry, especially given Liss' atrocious singing mixed with this unfamiliar language. It was downright asking for a beating. After this, do we lay low in London City for a while, or head back to Heavenport? Ox turned the conversation to serious matters. Everyone on board was under death's warrant, and the notoriety of the BlackSail pirate group preceded them. Liss' bounty was especially hefty, making Ox sometimes consider offing him himself. Who knows when the bounty hunters would catch their scent? The longer they linger, the more likely it would happen. It's safer at sea. The best move is to make for Heavenport swiftly. Well, Liss stroked his chin deep in thought. About 12,000 nautical miles off Baimaduchi's east coast lies an expansive island, known as Heavenport, not the luckiest of names. Another moniker it went by was Pirate Republic. Heavenport welcomes all ships to dock free of charge regardless of the weather, making it the go-to sanctuary for pirates and marauders. In the year 1274 of the St. Aaron calendar, the Empire launched its Eastern expedition. The Battle of the Great Wall shattered the defenses of the BMA Kingdom. Smashing through to the core, the Empire proposed a ceding of lands and minting rights in defeat. The king of BMA vowed not to surrender. Yet the overwhelming force of the Empire, like heavenly soldiers descending, cut a path of destruction to the coast. The king, besieged in his fortress, took his own life to spare citizens from slaughter, hoping to avoid a carnage. His heir, Philip VI, seeing no way out, surrendered and went to negotiate in Aaron Imperial City, only to be brutally ambushed and killed within the imperial palace. Eventually, some distantly related royal was propped up as a puppet king. Thus, the BMA Kingdom was demoted to a duchy. That should have been the end. But Emperor Aaron was filled with unbridled ambition. Felling trees for ships, smelting swords, the Eastern expedition continued relentlessly, even attempting to conquer the Far East Islands, whose landmass, when combined, was even more formidable than the vast Western continent, which was also known as one country. Heavenport initially served as a military fort, a frontline stronghold to store provisions, but stretched supply lines and unmatched attrition slowed the campaign. Even though they established footholds by usurping several nations, a united resistance eventually pushed back Emperor Aaron's forces, ending the Eastern conquest in futility. Later, Heavenport transitioned into a trade harbor, but due to the distance, the Emperor's influence waned, and the puppet prince he supported developed a spine of his own. Repeated failures to garrison troops there led to sailors claiming the port as their own lawless dominion. Over the years, pirates, raiders, and shipwrecked crews, using the hard-to-conquer constructions of the Emperor, established it as their stronghold, giving Heavenport its infamous name, Pirate Republic. They would often stage fake lighthouses on the cliffs of isolated islands in the eastern waters to lure ships to wreck, then plunder their cargoes. Liss was one of them. Below the azure depths, the BlackSail sway. Gold and silver treasure, blades ring sharp in the fray. Plunder and slaughter, disregarding the divine. Youth fleeting fast, all becomes meat and wine. This was the life of Liss. Let's get the money first. We can't stay ashore for too long. My arrangement with this area's sheriff is time-sensitive. It's good for no more than a week. After some consideration, Liss reassured Ox, who was known for his meticulous planning. Ox had never fouled up an assignment, not once, which was why he was helmsman, akin to second officer. Others had a history of messing up. He also planned to bring on more sailors. The last recruitment brought in a traitor bold enough to try and steal his own ship. An uproar broke amongst the criminals from all over the world. The situation was only contained by the first officer and stalwarts like Ox and Rain, who could stand against 100. All were killed and thrown to the fish, with the ringleader suffering at the hands of Rain, the torture king. After the incident, aside from the BlackSail's 10 core members, everyone else deserted once on land, leaving them desperate for manpower and funds. The East Coast idea king, Shotti, devised a perfect scheme to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Over the years, Liss had recruited countless hands, many of whom perished. Only the toughest survived this long to become the core backbone, warriors of formidable strength who could stand their ground and wield weight with their words. Desperados like himself, with no place to call home, and so took to the seas to do business. Set sail for the highest castle on the East Coast. London City. Rain bellowed out an indiscernible cheer. Liss scowled. Along with being psychopathic, Rain had a tendency to imitate. He'd order what others had at a restaurant, and his snazzy dark red leather coat was lifted from a fashionable trendsetter. The ship's crew had all picked up certain catchphrases to some extent. Liss didn't understand why these phrases were still popular in the different world, perhaps due to their high applicability, as their current linguistic context had been stretched to the limit. London City straddled a bay on the East Coast where the tidal differences were minimal. The harbor was broad and deep, a natural haven from the wind, backed by the foothills, brimming with greenery. Seabirds circled beneath the azure sky, while the grasslands outside the city flourished in lush greenery. The main roads bustled with the constant flow of traffic and the hustle of merchants and peddlers, most dressed in simple attire. People like priest knights and other nobles with higher status had their exclusive passages and wouldn't appear here. The city walls were made of gray stone, impermeable and roughly 10 meters tall, with watchtowers standing sentinel. The entrance checkpoint was guarded by armored soldiers armed with long spears. Amid the rampant illegal organizations along the coastal areas, the laws became more stringent. Adventure groups and merchants had to present documents stamped by the guild to enter the city, and even farmers selling crops needed certification from local town officials. The entrance was exceptionally lively, with guards stopping and inspecting documents from one group after another. Long queues formed, buzzing with loud and fevered chatter, a mix of all races, not lacking in adventurers and mercenaries, tall, burly, and unfriendly in appearance, seeking their fortune in the prosperous coastal area. Ox and Rain stood out even in a crowd of tall figures, partly due to their racial advantages, though it was not the main reason. Both were exceptionally tall, even among their own kind, the type who were authority figures. The trio walked by, and their dangerous aura was unmistakable, compelling people to unconsciously clear the way. Although there were disgruntled murmurs, no one dared to voice their displeasure or even look them in the eye. Liss certainly didn't have the time to foolishly line up for inspection. At the front of the queue, a muscular red-haired adventurer was presenting his Adventurer Guild documents. Ox, unwilling to wait even a second, shoved the man aside. Such was his force that the adventurer almost toppled over, staggering several steps and bracing himself with his hands on the ground to avoid a fall. This man was the leader of an adventure team, and as he recovered, his eyes searched for the person who pushed him, ready to confront them. Ox seemed to notice and glanced indifferently at him. Upon seeing Ox clearly, the adventure team leader didn't dare to make a move. Staring at the special large sword on Ox's back, weighing over 300 pounds, he bit back his words. His fellow team members had anger in their eyes. One archer ready to draw an arrow from his arrow pouch, confident he could shoot through the large man's head or at least an eye. But he was stopped by the team leader, who shook his head at the archer. The guards noticed the trio, immediately identifying them as dangerous individuals, and although they seemed familiar, as if seen somewhere before, the guards dare not stop them, but also couldn't simply let them enter. So they quickly called for the guard captain. After exchanging greetings with the sheriff of London City, the guard captain knew the circumstances. Upon arrival, without saying much, given the number of onlookers, he just needed Liss to present something as a formality. Liss, but he truly didn't have any paper or scrolls of that sort. Liss reached into his cuirass, searching for a while, and could only present this. The guard captain was dumbstruck upon seeing what Liss presented, his own warrant. Although the depiction varied in detail, it still bore a striking resemblance to him. Go in. The guard captain frowned deeply, but pursued the matter no further. The trio brazenly entered London City. Team leader, why didn't you let me shoot that guy just now? He seemed to be nothing more than a big brute. The archer was still frustrated. They had planned to make a name in London City, yet they had been humiliated upon arrival. The adventure team leader also felt disgruntled, but swallowed his pride, explaining, "Before coming here, I made some preparations, talked to some familiar seafarers to find out what to watch out for, who not to provoke. They are from the BlackSail pirate group, notorious around these parts of the coast. It's best we don't get entangled with them." BlackSail pirate group. That sounds familiar. Wait, isn't that the gang that killed the entire family of Blue Bay Port's Lord 2 months ago? A swordsman recalled. However, he had heard that none in the Lord's family had been good folks, members of a cult with practices like child sacrifice. Their demise had been something people took pleasure in, hence the BlackSail pirates had a mixed reputation. How could that be possible? To commit such an act, and still be able to enter the city so openly? The archer spoke, almost disbelieving and inadvertently raising his voice. "With a guard blind? Keep it down." The team leader whispered, "London City is a major city, an important port for the duchy, not directly overseen by any particular lord, with complex intermingling powers. The noble masters inside are probably fiercely vying with each other and need outsiders to get things done." "I see." The swordsman had an epiphany. These checks were simply to keep small-time criminals outside, preventing the city from falling into utter chaos and affecting the money flow. True tough customers appreciated by the noble masters were allocated a slice of the cake. The waters seemed quite deep indeed. After listening, the archer remained silent for a while, but still felt indignant, adding, "What does all that amount to? Once we make a name and become hull-level adventurers, all these pirate rabble will be nothing but minions." The team leader gave a wry smile. Aspiring to such dreams was good. The East Coast had an abundance of capable individuals. Just having some renown in such a chaotic place was no small feat. Hull-level adventurers, one can only hope. The team leader spoke no more, taking out the guild's documents to comply with the inspection honestly. London City. Spires and red brick roofs were scattered in harmonious disarray. A few arched plank windows partially open, clothes hanging on ropes strung with iron nails outside, and the occasional potted plant being tended. On the outskirts of the city, buildings were densely packed, where square beige kiln bricks and red tiles were piled layer upon layer. On the cobblestone-paved main thoroughfare surged a crowd of laborers, Jianghu mages, stall vendors peddling curious and ancient wares, and mercenary travelers of all sorts. Even though the residents' dwelling places and various shops and inns seemed haphazardly cobbled together to a dazzling degree, within the inner ring of London City, those majestic buildings that towered skywards could be seen from anywhere in the city. The Admiral's Castle, among other key functional buildings, the Adventure Guild, the city government office, as well as estates and high-end entertainment venues owned by the nobles. There is also a respectable arcane academy in London City, along with several educational institutions. Although not the top tier, they were nonetheless first-rate. Those structures accentuated the city's splendor, with arches, flying buttresses, and intricate bas-reliefs highlighting curvilinear dynamics. The facade's floral badges were interrupted, with curved eaves on the horizontally bent roofline and significantly pronounced wall reliefs. They were extremely ornate, with a strong interplay of light and shadow, wrapped in an eerie veil of mystery thanks to the sacred effigies of unknown religious figures and monstrous sculptures. Many merchants and travelers who first came to the city would stop in their tracks at the sight of these scenes. But that did not include the BlackSail pirates. The trio passed through the city outskirts, walking past the fish market reeking with the stench of seafood. At this moment, the place was set up with wooden execution platforms where hangmen were getting ready to hang criminals with their ropes. Liss had no interest in such spectacles, knowing that others who had come to this place without measuring their own weight all ended up with the same fate. He arrived at the meeting point he had agreed upon with the dark elf Shotti. Everything should have been taken care of without a hitch. At the entrance of a moderately sized inn, the iron rooster weather vane on the roof squeaked as it swiveled in the sea breeze. Liss spotted Shotti from afar. His outfit pretty much screamed danger. Shotti had joined 6 years ago. Formerly, he mixed in with the crowd in the Far East Islands. His attire resembled theirs, tall at 189, with a flowing black cloak, flood boots, a Ronin hat, and a Far East characteristic thin blade knife on his waist, all giving off a rather imposing Jianghu air. Liss had heard Shotti boast that he learned Qigong in one country, though whether it was true or false, he sure fought fiercely. Seeing only Shotti at the meeting point, Liss' brows rose in alarm. Fuck, something must have gone wrong. Rain scanned the surroundings vigilantly, worried that their number 4 had been killed and that Shotti had turned traitor, now possibly selling them out. Ox thought it impossible for those men to be in trouble, given their skills. The first officer and that man were fearsome, but his hand still rested on the hilt of the special large sword, just in case. As the top dog, Liss couldn't show fear. Can't you think of something auspicious for once? Stop freaking out. Liss approached nonchalantly, reaching out to lift the hat off Shotti's head, and asked, "Where are the others?" With the removal of the broad hat, Shotti's fully obscured features came into view. Although a dark elf, he had very unique characteristics, considered to be an ill omen in the Western continent, but actually a condition known as albinism. His skin was a cold white, eyes red, and silver hair that draped over his shoulders was tied back by a leather band. His chiseled features, even among elves, made him among the most striking. Passing women halted in their tracks upon seeing him, and a young girl lost 2 eggs from her basket without noticing, struck dumb by his beauty. Next to Liss and his companions, Shotti looked like he was from a completely different painting. They're still at the bank. The job is done, but the first officer is still reconciling the accounts. It'll take some time. He told me to come back first and report. Shotti, not wanting to draw attention, pulled his hat back down over his head. "I told you. How could anything happen to the first officer and Brother Shah?" said Rain with a cheeky smile. "Man, that's a neat trick." "Whoa, lift off." Rain was already imagining the scene of splurging at Heavenport after dividing the spoils, where he had several mistresses, guaranteed authentic furry. It's now time for dreaming. Shotti was at a loss for words. Rain was an easy man to guess, at least when he was in good spirits, with his saliva secretions running lively and loud. Hearing the progress was smooth, Liss' furrowed brows relaxed. If those two weren't reliable, they might as well wait for the errant Sword King himself. First Officer, a single character for a name, fun. Previously a well-known member of the Warlock Alliance, a top graduate from the BMA Kingdom's National Arcane Academy. Essentially the Oxford of the Western continent, he is that extremely rare real deal of a magician who can tank, hit, heal, charm, and inflict long-range attacks along with high-class area damage. He is a veritable hexagon warrior, as well as a cultured man, a stark contrast to some of the illiterates on the ship. If compared to a mobile games gotcha mechanism, he would definitely be a human rights card. Hiring him wasn't a stroke of luck. The guy had stirred up a huge mess and ran across the continent to hide in the BMA Duchy, on the entire East Coast. Only I was bold enough to take him in. Ship's gunner, Morrison, also referred to by Rain as Brother Shah. Even Liss wasn't sure about him. To date, his origins remain unknown. His power is immensely exaggerated, sometimes giving one the feeling that he might even take on the Iron Sword King. Not because of his sheer brute force, but rather because of his astonishing skills, combat experience, which he elevated to an art form. 2 months ago, during an incident at Blue Bay Port, there was a gold-level adventurer serving under a lord as a guest, no weakling by any measure, who was swiftly defeated by Morrison in just a few moves. His iron whip blade moved like a phantom, its feints becoming afterimages. But it took only one instant, one extremely sharp instant, traveling across the throat. And, as the heart beat, blood rushed out like a spouting fountain, killing the man instantly. Morrison's strength was thus evident, although Liss was somewhat wary of him. After more than a year of living together, he realized this fellow was just an ordinary person. No need to see snakes in every cup. All right, Rain and Ox, you guys go back to the hotel to pack up and then return to the ship. To be honest, I'm a bit worried about leaving those 3 idiots in charge of the ship. I'll go to the bank with Shotti to wrap up the business in town, and then we can spend a few days at the dock hiring some sailors before heading back to Heavenport. Liss set the plan, and indeed, as Ox had said, they couldn't linger in town. Let's not even talk about the bounty hunters. Noble masters each harbored their own devious intentions. The sheriff was really just a middleman, responsible for making connections and taking the blame. After Shotti found a connection, this job, although for the benefit of BlackSail, also helped the city's lords fight their enemies. The bank and the associated gambling house clashed with the business of one lord, and thus they wanted to put a stop to it. Continuing to work for the lords would not be a wise move. After this job, it was time to leave. Although official endorsement provided a certain guarantee of safety, allowing them to run rampant in the city, getting too deeply involved would be comfortable but risky. If someone grabbed you by the tail, you'd end up being manipulated. Between desperados and inmates, Liss much preferred the former. Arriving at the East Sea's highest port, Rain hadn't finished speaking. When not there yet, Shotti interjected, this guy really had rabies. He took the lead and guided Liss to the underground bank. As the two of them walked away, Ox and Rain were left behind. Rain hesitated for a moment. What do you think about that new Tiger Man? I've been watching him all month. His skills are unmistakable. He's definitely from the Thieves Guild. You know, an organization like the Thieves Guild would never allow joining another force such treacherous behavior. They would chop such a traitor into pieces and throw him into the sewers. There's something fishy about it, and he's most likely a double-crosser who killed a leader or stole something from the guild and fled here to the East Coast to lay low. Once the captain was gone, Rain started to gossip, not getting along well with a new guy on the ship. Among the core 10 members, he was the latest to join, only having participated in the Blue Bay port job. Ox remained silent for a moment. The Thieves Guild, huh? I'm not too familiar with shore matters. Ox brushed it off casually. He had also heard some rumors. The Thieves Guild was indeed offering a reward for a living Tiger Man, who was said to have fled to this side of the East Coast. The coincidence was a bit too perfect. If that Tiger Man was really from the Thieves Guild and had stolen treasures to seek refuge, that would be a different story, depending on whether what he stole could save his life. If he was empty-handed, it wasn't that they were afraid of the Thieves Guild, but rather the act of boarding the ship while hiding one's past misdeeds, bringing trouble, left them no choice but to get rid of him. However, these were just speculations for now, and no conclusions have been drawn. After all, there were countless Tiger Men mixed in these waters. Just talking, said Rain with a laugh. Let's pack our stuff and get on the ship. The divine began. Shut up. Ox wasn't in the mood for jokes, as it seemed the Tiger Man was recommended by the first officer. This matter needed to be brought up on the agenda, certainly before they set sail. You really have no sense of humor. Rain, holding a purse that contained roughly 80 golden dragons, strolled leisurely into the inn, feeling bored. London City's inner ring. The underground bank was located beneath a gambling house. Lending and gambling complemented each other, with zero-cost debts formed on the premise of cheating and high-interest loans compounded over short cycles, yielding rapid results. The only downside was that it wasn't stable enough. One needed either a powerful backer or some personal skill to consider this line of work. An honest person trying their hand at this job might find themselves exposed to the rainy morning the very next day. The iron gate at the entrance of the bank was violently twisted from inside out, as if someone had been desperately trying to escape. The main hall on the first underground level. The room was strewn with dismembered corpses, blood pooled around them, and flies had already begun to swarm, emitting a foul stench. Life is filled with joys and sorrows, just as oxen and horses embellish it. Morrison sat on a silk cushion in an upscale red pine chair, legs crossed, letting a survivor wipe the fresh blood off his boots. He was about 1.8 meters tall, with curly, snake-like black hair that seemed wet, and half of his face severely burned and disfigured. To make the complicated, twisted scars on his skin appear more aesthetic, he had carved over 10 diagonal, straight, and conspicuous scars with a knife, which indeed provided some semblance of symmetry. Morrison dressed quite plainly, wearing a cracked, color-faded crocodile skin coat, black cotton trousers, and a pair of thick, durable leather boots. However, he carried an entire arsenal on his person, a rapid-fire crossbow strapped to his left arm, a custom shoulder holster that held approximately 20 flying knives, and his signature pair of whip blades at his waist, one leather and the other like the belly of a python, all blades. He toyed with a large dagger in his hand, the most versatile weapon, effective in a variety of situations. The remaining enforcers of the bank dampened the backs of their clothes with cold sweat, kneeling and trembling as they wiped Morrison's boots with a silk handkerchief. 15 minutes earlier, a dark elf who had been working at the bank for half a month said he had found some easy marks and could make a good score, instructing people to open the iron gate. Instead, four figures burst in, the tallest lizard man nearly reaching the height of the floor. These brutes came in, locked the gate behind them, and immediately began killing anyone they saw. The dark elf was no pushover, either. His blade rose and fell, beheading an enforcer in an instant. The bank also employed several tough characters who had experience running protection for caravans, but they stood no chance against these assassins, especially the man with the half-disfigured face. There's still a flying knife with scalp attached nailed to the wall. The head security of the bank had taken a knife from this man with a disfigured face to the forehead, bursting out through the back of the skull and embedding a piece of scalp into the wall. Morrison, seeing his boots were almost clean, got up and walked over to the desk. He didn't recognize the fruit in the fruit bowl. These scoundrels were filthy rich, probably having the seasonal fruit shipped and expressed from elsewhere. He picked a purple berry and chewed a few bites. "Eating this won't kill me, right?" Morrison commented. The fruit was juicy and sweetly tart, with a firm texture that didn't compare to that of cheaper varieties. These rotten people really knew how to enjoy themselves. The few survivors left dare not speak, merely shivering, afraid to utter a word that might enrage their captors. Morrison walked over to the tiger man, Swan, who was currently fiddling with the lock of the vault's iron gate with two strange, rod-like cones. "Can you manage this? You've been at it so long and still haven't picked the lock," Morrison questioned. Unfortunately, they had accidentally killed the person in charge and couldn't find the key immediately, but this tiger man had volunteered. Among his race, Swan was on the more slender side, not particularly tall, silent when moving, and rather agile when it came to stripping weapons from the dead. "Give me more time. Don't disturb me," Swan insisted, his sparse brown fur and green, beastly eyes filled with sullen focus as he concentrated on the lock, listening for the lever inside. At that moment, Shotti led Liss to the scene. "Not done yet? We can't stay here much longer." The guard outside keeping watch said the sheriff could only give us 15 more minutes max. They need to clean up the scene, and the dead need to be registered, Liss said as he kicked aside a couple of corpses and approached BlackSail's first officer. Finn was currently perusing the ledger. If nothing was amiss, there should be 317 golden dragons in the vault, earnings equivalent to robbing 2 merchant ships. We're almost there. Swan is picking the lock to the treasury. Fin pressed his monocle with chain adornment, his long, straight black hair casually draped over, donning a dark purple silk figure-hugging corset robe, exuding a bit of a scholar's refined air, eyebrows sharp as sword blades, lips thin, features stern, quite a knockout in the looks department, but those excessively cold eyes were extremely sinister. Liss scanned the basement, Brother Shaw, Tiger Man. They were all there, but one was missing. Where's that big lizard? Liss searched around. The most notably large figure among BlackSail was that thing. It wouldn't be possible to miss such a huge person. There wasn't even a spot for him to rest on the ship. Being too big, he always slept in the cargo hold. He's gone to the smithy. This place is too cramped, his axe bumping into everything. He said he's uncomfortable without a weapon that fits his hand. Fin closed the ledger and picked up the booklet, placing it over the candle flame, which quickly consumed it to ashes. Forget it. Never mind that idiot. Having said this, Liss, together with the others, began to observe Swan's lock-picking. The classic scenario: one person works and a few supervise. Only the clear sound of a bolt being turned was heard. Done. Swan withdrew the pick and effortlessly pushed open the iron gate. How much did you get on your side? Fin asked Liss, needing to tally the total. 79 golden dragons, and some silver coins that haven't been counted yet. Roughly 83 or 84. Liss replied, Is that so? Well, that makes about 400 in total. Even for fun, the corners of his mouth twitched into a faint smile, yet this smile resembled more a spasm of his facial muscles. This heist had been a little too easy. The cowards in the city were like cutting vegetables, too simple, making this job exceptionally cost-effective. 400. Liss's eyebrows flew up in delight. You're the captain. After you. Fin gestured for Liss to proceed first. Liss hastily waved his hand and glanced at Shotti, speaking with feigned respect. After you, my friend, for you are the true hero. Shotti clicked his tongue because Liss occasionally blurted out nonsensical remarks, influencing everyone on the ship, who had all absorbed a bit of it. He didn't care and went into the treasury first. Liss was about to step in when, We have a big problem. Shotti suddenly shouted from inside, his voice full of panic. Even Liss's composure was shaken. Could it be there was no money? Without money, this would be a total waste. They wouldn't be able to pay off the sheriff with gifts, and without money, they couldn't even think about recruiting sailors. With just over 10 men, they couldn't operate a twin-masted sailing ship, and they would be stranded in London City. He quickly took 2 steps into the treasury. Fuck, we have a big problem. Liss also shouted. The two of them raised a fuss in a comic duo, and Fun's brows knit tightly. If there was no money in the treasury, they couldn't come back empty-handed. On the surface, this operation was pirates slaying a tyrant, but in reality, it was one lord damn another lord, all to fill the recent deficit of the pirate gang's budget. There is only one path to follow: cut off the rival lord's head and claim the bounty, to be displayed at the top of Yin Yang Building. If their own lord was willing to pay the reward, that would be fine, but if he dared not, then they would all ascend the top of the building together. What's the situation? Swan had spent considerable effort to unlock the lock. It was one of the more challenging locks in his career. All that effort for nothing would make him a laughingstock. How idiotic would that be? Fin entered the treasury, only to find Liss and Shotti. Those 2 dumbasses were acting up again, playing him for a fool. It wasn't that the treasury was empty. It was just that the glittering jewelry on a table was dazzling, along with some silverware and gemstones set in rings and pendants. Even in the dim light, their polished facets refracted a gentle, luminescent glow. Apart from these items, all the expected cash was accounted for, dutifully present. There's no problem at all. Not yet. Liss pulled a fast one. Morrison, there's no tinder to light a torch. Citing Liss's own style, Morrison saw that Shotti, the kid with bushy brows and big eyes, was also starting to create crap work. This is just for everyone to have a good laugh. Pop the champagne. Liss slipped an intricately carved, elaborate ring for ladies on his finger, playing with it. He was quite pleased. This haul was a bloody fortune. Fin opened all the drawers, made a rough estimate, and found that the gold coins were a bit less than the account book suggested. He continued to check the half-human-tall hemp sacks in the corner. The silverware and some silver and copper coins seemed about right when added up, and there was even a surplus. Including the unexpected bonus of a small pile of jewelry on the table, the loot was quite a bounty. Shotti picked up a necklace, not sure how much these trinkets could sell for. We need to find a professional jewelry appraiser to estimate the value. Shotti hadn't expected the extra loot, and the quality of the jewelry didn't seem fake. There's no need for that. I know a bit about geology from my time at Penn National Arcane Academy, and I've studied minerals. A strand of blood-red flame sprang up on Fun's fingertips, burning continuously and providing ample light in the treasury as he began to inspect carefully. You can't go 3 sentences without mentioning that crappy school of yours. Are you the only one who's educated, or what? We'll probably need a few laborers to carry these heavy hemp sacks onto the ship. Liss didn't waste words. He was almost laughing his face off at the sight of all the money as he began scouring the treasury with the others. Half an hour later, all the goods were packed. Liss had somehow managed to get 8 bundles of hemp sacks onto the ground. The casino had practically closed down. After the number 5 men had turned the upper and lower floors into a morgue, seeing the scene outside the door and the few guards were meant to block and watch over the place, nobody dared to come close. It was only after Swan fetched a number of laborers from the materials market that they could carry these money-filled sacks back to the ship. These shirtless, dark-skinned, honest folk didn't care what was in the sacks. A generous payment was all they needed to help carry the load, and the more handsomely paid, the harder they worked. There were still tasks to be done in the city. They needed to deliver gifts to the sheriff. The secret port was an establishment that the noble master above had opened for smuggling to evade taxes. If it didn't clear the air and got their ship confiscated, it would only lead to more complications. The 2 bundles of sacks in Liss' hands were heavy. If the gold coins and jewels inside were exposed, it wasn't unusual to be robbed in broad daylight. The value of these 2 bundles, plus a little more, could buy another twin-masted sailing ship. It was like walking down the street with a small manor on his shoulder. Liss had planned to hand them over to Morrison to take back to the ship, but after some thought, if that guy ran off with the goods, nobody could stop him. Better safe than sorry. Caution ensures a long life at sea. You and Shotti go back first. I'll finish the business here. Liss handed a bundle to Shotti and another to Fun, keeping Morrison by his side. Liss knew Fun wouldn't mess around. His record was notorious. Even the neighboring countries of Pedin wouldn't go near him. He had said goodbye to the mainland for life, left to make his way on the sea. Also, Fun was one of the earliest crew members. Although bonding with a fugitive was utterly stupid, after 6 years, they had developed an understanding that made for more efficient collaboration. All right, be careful in the city. I don't have time to bail you out. If you get detained by the noble master, I'll just sail away. Fun half-jokingly said, although being a magician, he was strong enough, lifting the money sacks with ease. Liss had a vein popping on his forehead. No one on the ship ever uttered auspicious words. With Brother Shah covering me, I'd dare to visit the Empress's bedroom, let alone this small London city. There's nowhere I can't go. Although the masters in London City were loaded, Liss didn't take them seriously. He had been seeking stability lately. The last time at Blue Bay Port, things blew up quite a bit. He heard from a reliable source that the East Coast governor had set his eyes on him, and the naval forces were tightening their surveillance. If not for the need to kill off a few local tycoons and spread some money around to thank everyone, he would have been in more trouble. Seeing those laborers whose bare feet had calluses thicker than pancakes and the dense array of scratches on their shoulders from the hemp ropes, one could tell that making a living was not easy. The thing was that there had been no natural disasters in Bima Duchy in these years. It was a time of plenty. But the East Coast strategy was like electrifying a fish pond with a high-voltage shock. Whether through fire, water, forests, or even under girls' skirts, it was exceptionally hard work. But they had to collect taxes, aiming to master civilian management. To be honest, I'm not very good at this ménage à trois. The Empress, that'd be like being run over and flattened by a steamroller. Morrison let slip an explosive comment. Although he didn't know what the Empress looked like, Since she was the wife of the man who reigned over the western continent, he imagined her bust would be as big as papayas. Fin narrowed his eyes, tasting a different flavor in the words. Morrison had been on the ship for over a year. Setting Liss aside, he was now, apart from himself and Ox, the most influential talker on board. It wasn't that Fun was overthinking. Liss did have that intention to find a capable outsider to balance the war merit faction on the ship. That way, giving orders wouldn't involve losing face, and there would be a middleman. If I didn't say more, it was a good thing Liss had such insights. One couldn't survive as a pirate based on friendship and loyalty alone. Stability, these two words, were of utmost importance. That was the key to longevity. BlackSail was a group that placed themselves on a death list, with their interests tightly bound and completely nailed down. If anyone lost their head, the Navy would hunt them down and string them up on the gallows together. Only together could they be as solid as iron. In the end, according to Fun's observation, Morrison was just a simple day-to-day person. "Let's go." Fun gave a shout. "See you at the secret port." After Shotti spoke, the two of them didn't say much more. They needed to get going quickly. It was not a good idea to show off around town with so much money. Liss gave a gesture with his hands, signaling them to get lost. The guard captain at the entrance of the gambling house watched as a group left, laden with large and small bags, feeling somewhat bitter. Who could blame them? These guys were experts in killing and looting. There were at least 20 or 30 thugs in the gambling house, some even from the escort business formerly, and this group had slaughtered them all without breaking a sweat. With what had happened, the gambling house would struggle to do business for at least the next half year. "What the hell are you looking at? Get in there and clean up," Morrison shouted at the guards without a hint of politeness. Those guards were just connections from the city piled in there. They were not on the same level as the military-trained regular army. Put simply, they were just biding their time like oxen or horses. The guard captain's brain went blank, and though he was steaming inside, he didn't dare show it. This gambling house had its backers, and these desperados were carrying out the orders of a noble master from the opposition. They had their protection too, and even the sheriff's office was entirely in their pocket. Liss was speechless. Morrison was okay overall. It was just that he sometimes had a mean streak in his heart and could be as aggressive as a madman. There should still be some rule of law. "The sheriff is waiting at the usual place?" Liss calmly asked the guard. "Right. He said he will be at the theater all day waiting for you guys," the guard replied, not daring to show annoyance at Liss, who had a war hammer on his back. "I see. Things are quite a mess inside the gambling house, especially the basement. Thanks for your hard work." Liss counted out more than 30 silver coins from his own purse. "Have you guys get a good meal, and maybe a massage after you're done. How could we accept this?" He said this, but he took the coins unreservedly and smiled naturally. That's why the man was a captain, after all. The purchasing power of 30 silver coins was enough for an ordinary family to live on for a few months if they were frugal. With the money in hand, the guard captain worked more efficiently, ordering a few subordinates to go in and deal with the bodies. At that moment, as the ground trembled slightly, a member of the BlackSail pirate group finally arrived. Walman was over 3 meters tall, covered in black chitin scales except for his belly. He came from the subdragon people of the Great Wetland in the far south of the western continent. With 8 spike-like horns behind his flattened head looking fierce and explosive muscle lines, just his heavy tail alone must have weighed several dozen pounds. The oversized double-edged battle axe, which would be used by common folks, seemed like a one-handed axe in his grip, and his pants and boots were all custom-made by tailors. He couldn't find his size off the shelf. Subdragon people were on average just a bit taller than humans, but Walman was special due to his innate gift, standing out even in his homeland. "Where are they?" Walman approached the 2 men. "It's all over now." Liss felt a wave of frustration on his forehead. "I came here for nothing, then. I'm going back to the ship," Walman replied nonchalantly. "What are you doing on the ship?" Liss asked irritably. "I've been reading a Cania travelogue lately," Walman replied earnestly. Morrison suddenly showed respect. A Cania travelogue was a masterpiece written by a famous literary figure of the Aran Empire. The book, with millions of words, intricately described the magnificent and tumultuous history of the Western continent 80 years ago. Some scholars interpreted it in extremely obscure ways, or in Liss words, it was pretty abstract and pretentious. You finished the book, so you're preparing for graduate school? Liss teased. I must say, except for the first officer, I'm probably the most educated person on the ship, Walman said with a hint of pride. Liss' fist clenched. This big lizard used to be an officer of the Wetland Rebel Army and became an exile on the East Coast after the rebellion was suppressed. Before the rebellion started, he had self-studied for a middle-level history degree in a neighboring country. Not a genius, but still a graduate from a lesser-known institution on the Western continent, which didn't match his wildly savage appearance at all. Liss found himself at a loss for words. Hee, so it's just the two of you who have studied, huh? Well, I've been to college. Do you understand spectroscopy? Know anything about the wavelength of electromagnetic waves? Liss started to brag. Walman looked confused, and Morrison pondered with his chin in his hand. Liss had a sharp mind and was known for his golden phrases. His speech was quite cultured, but when it came to literacy level on the ship, he ranked second to last. The very last was a low-level member of the Demon Clan from who knows where. Any word that was slightly uncommon, Liss couldn't recognize. He needed fun to read some contracts for him because they contained too many technical terms. He was the most illiterate one amongst them. Spectroscopy, huh? Not very familiar with it. Walman figured Liss had started dreaming about non-existent degrees, which was quite pitiful. I'll go with you to the theater. London City, as a trade hub on the East Shore, boasted an astonishing volume of goods and a vibrant array of docked ships. But only merchant ships. Secret port. Around London City were several natural sea erosion cliffs, forming giant caves, incredibly hidden, which became a secret stronghold for the nobility inside the city to evade the duchy's taxes and hoard personal armaments. But once a significant scale was reached, it couldn't be hidden. The Navy commander of London City must have known, but since these families were deeply rooted in transferred benefits, he could only turn a blind eye. The twin-masted sailing ship of the BlackSail pirate group was anchored at one such secret port. Reaching the secret port was not via a stone-paved road, but through a narrow path compacted with earth, wide enough only for a carriage, flanked by grand green forests, desolate and uninhabited. The clang of iron continuously resounded, swords and armor striking and sparking off each other, all red-eyed, life and death hanging by a thought. Within the greenwoods, you're too slow, too slow. How can you survive like this? Rain, with plenty to spare, swung his armor, blocking one deadly chop after another. Two robust, fierce-looking individuals clad in leather armor were assailing Rain from both sides, their swords sharp and unyielding. Adult men trained professionally with cold weapons. Slicing flesh and chopping bones was far easier than imagined. A single successful hit would be fatally crippling. With a loud clang, as if metal shattered, Rain's left arm powerfully blocked, meeting the short sword, causing the long sword to curl. A bounty hunter's hand split open, losing strength, the nerves in the joint completely paralyzed, his weapon clattering to the ground. Then, as quick as a streak of silver, his sharp, gleaming claws gripped the neck, the nail, as tough as metal, completely digging into the flesh, shattering the windpipe straight to the bone, twisting it off like snapping a bamboo stick. The head hung at a strange angle, instantly slain. The remaining bounty hunter, seeing his companion dead, did not panic. His mental strength was exceptionally strong, and his skills were much better than the others. His sword moved sweeping towards Rain like a sudden storm. Rain, having dealt with one, had no intention of engaging lengthy combat. This was no joke. A lion uses full strength to catch a rabbit. How could one gamble with life? Amid the chaotic sword moves, Rain fully blocked with his armor, his claws waving wildly with increased ferocity, sparks flying. The bounty hunter gradually fell into disadvantage. Knowing the opponent had an overwhelming strength, he feinted an upward stab to deceive Rain, who crossed his arms in front of his chest. Following that, he diagonally slashed sideways, attempting to strike at Rain's abdomen and end his life. But Rain, with his large build, was unexpectedly fast and agile. He swiftly took a leap back, landing agilely in a tree 6 or 7 meters high, claws embedded in the bark, his cold gaze making the bounty hunter's hairs stand on end. It's over. That was the bounty hunter's first thought. Rain pounced down from above, unafraid of being thrust through by a sword. The bounty hunter instinctively used the best solution and thrust towards Rain's abdomen. Indeed, with a loud clang, birds in the forest scattered from fear, that long sword inevitably repelled by the arm armor, and the bounty hunter's sword-wielding hand was momentarily weakened, seeing the swordsman about to be gutted. Yet his left hand was more agile than his right. The long sword fell behind him. His other hand, unseen by Rain, grabbed the hilt from behind. Earlier lessons taught him not to strike rashly. Horizontal or vertical chops would all be blocked by the werewolf. Only a stab could work. Though late, everything happened in a blink, a move returning horsesword thrust straight at Rain's head, unavoidably swift like lightning. Snap, crackle. Blood oozed from Rain's hand, vividly dripping on the broken stone path below, forcefully gripping the sword, firmly clamped. Not bad. No wonder you even dare to come for me. Rain held the sword blade tightly in his hand. No matter how much the bounty hunter exerted force, he couldn't move it at all. The bounty hunter quickly backed away, pulling a foldable knife from a strap around his waist for emergencies. Kasi, boss. The bounty hunter roared his leader's name, knowing he could no longer turn the tide by himself. Ha! Rain let out a terrifying laugh, his fangs exposed, his gaping maw in full view. He tossed his sword away and licked the blood off his claws with his long tongue. His horrifying face struck immense fear. Indeed, it's a reasonable arrangement for your boss to come and chop at our second officer, called Kasi. Is it? Truly unlucky. He drew the short straw. Rain didn't even have to think about the outcome. The renowned Sword of Dawn, an officer from Blue Bay Port on the East Shore, was chopped up by Ox in less than a minute. Where did these bounty hunters stand in comparison? In the midst of talking, Ox carried over halves of a body, the upper half and the lower half, grabbing an arm and a leg in one hand, to Rain's side of the battlefield. The body named Kasi had a massive cut at the waist with unstoppable bleeding. Damn, brother. Rain saw that he had complete control over the situation and popped open champagne. Upon seeing the horrible state of their leader's body, the bounty hunter's face turned ashen. In his moment of shock, there was a snap. Rain flew past, and all that could be heard was the bursting of tendons and the brittle sound of bones. As he swooshed by, he tore off the man's forearm, completely disabling the swordsman, the cross-section of the shoulder pouring blood. Who commanded you? Ox tossed the bisected body carelessly onto the ground like trash and asked the remaining bounty hunter, "Need orders to kill you pirates? Stop the nonsense. Let's get on with it." This swordsman remained defiant, aware of his imminent death, undisturbed by the injury on his shoulder. "Fine, you're a real man." Ox didn't say much more. The special large sword in his hand felt as light as a foam board. He granted the swordsman a quick death by thrusting the sword into his chest, coming out from the back, throwing and smashing him onto the ground, killing him instantly. Seeing that the bounty hunters were now all dead. Could it be the Lord in the city ordered this, wanting to eliminate us, and then swallow the money in the bank's vault? Wouldn't that be dangerous for our captain? Rain speculated that these men had been watching them for a while, only waiting for him and Ox to be alone on this small path leading to the secret port to ambush them. Ox thought for a while and spoke. "Impossible. We stumbled upon unexpected riches, incomparable to the noble's wealth. Generations have been conducting business here, uninterested in such petty sums. Managing that gambling den and bank was only to show competitors some attitude, to warn them not to overextend their reach. If it were for reputation, his subordinates could take the blame. Moreover, the aristocratic family's true faces in this area are well known. They wouldn't fear being linked with us. He also knows our capabilities. If he were to send someone, he would let his significant guest appear, or perhaps request the Navy commander from London City to send troops." After hearing Ox's analysis, Rain felt it was well-reasoned and logical. It seems these were indeed freelance bounty hunters, sigh. Rain sighed, squatting to look at the swordsman's body. Nowadays, people think they are invincible just because they have some skills and decide to become bounty hunters, tricking their buddies as if it's nothing, providing some comfort to their hearts, laughing it off, but don't take it too seriously. See what end they meet? Everyone had already died, but Rain still sharply criticized, with Ox clicking his tongue. Liss' sharp and highly offensive remarks often misled many on the ship. However, the captain had a saying that was very true. Birds die for food, humans die for money. They were all just out to make a living, not asking for much. Ox closed the swordsman's eyes, then immediately started searching the body. Rain also began gathering the spoils of war. They found just over 10 silver coins, some copper coin scraps from the several bodies, and no important documents. It seemed these bounty hunters indeed risked much for wealth. They also found a whole 11 paper warrants drawn by extremely skilled artists specializing in this. Even if some minor details were not matching, the likenesses were impressively lifelike, instantly recognizable, regardless of the race. Rain flipped through them, searching for his own. This time it's increased by 30. I feel like killing myself, damn. Rain complained, and it was just for him alone. Probably added by the relatives of the Blue Bay Port Lord from other places, like his uncles, since I killed his whole family, a family of cult followers. Their death was indeed a service to the people. Over 10 silver coins were still money. Ox pocketed them calmly, unbothered about his own bounty. No matter how high it was, one had to be alive to claim it. On the path to the secret port, Rain, noticing the rustling in the trees, immediately dropped the warrant. With a loud bang, like thunder shaking the earth, the air from the sword's swing nearly snapped the surrounding grass leaves, rustling loudly. Ox drew his sword and struck horizontally with a force unstoppable by anything, severing a tree thick as a basin cleanly at its trunk. The smooth cut accompanied by a long crashing sound as the tree fell to the side, raising a cloud of dust. "It's me." Swan, nimble, jumped to another tree branch and then agilely landed on the ground without making a sound. Rain could see the newcomer clearly. Rain himself didn't think much of Swan, who likely was hiding his affiliations with the Thief Guild and might cause trouble later on. "What are you doing here?" Ox was also wary of this mysterious tiger man. Swan informed them about the situation in the city. The task was done. The money was secured. The first officer and Shotti were right behind along with a group of laborers. The captain and Brother Shah were handling the final matters. He had heard some noise over here and came to check it out, not expecting to find Ox and the other. "Whose dead men are these?" Swan looked down at the severed parts on the ground and the corpse of Heart flying, asking curiously. "Just some ignorant bounty hunters." Ox sized up Swan, appearing to scrutinize him thoroughly. After assessing the situation, Swan placed 2 fingers to his lips and blew a loud whistle. In a moment, Fun and Shotti, followed by a group of laborers, arrived. Rain opened his arms wide in a welcoming gesture. "Come back, General Fun, my proudest belief." The magic so vivid before my eyes, tears flowing without reason. I vaguely remember Blue Bay Port and the powerful necromancy, driving back all foes, annihilating all navies. Rain burst into song. Ox's face soured like he had eaten a lemon. Fun was even more gobsmacked. This guy was too damn abstract, utterly moronic. If Liss did not control his speech, soon all of BlackSail would turn into such rabid dogs, completely unsound. Fun pinched the bridge of his nose, setting that aside, and asked Ox in detail about the happenings here. After hearing Ox's analysis, Fun agreed that these bounty hunters acted alone in their greed for wealth. As for the group of laborers following, they were already anxious about taking the back roads, but now seeing the corpses on the ground, when had they ever seen such a spectacle? "Gentlemen, you don't need to pay us. We can't go any further." The leading laborer spoke apprehensively, also seeing Ox and Rain, 2 tall members of an alien race, with fresh blood on their swords and claws. The laborers, already drenched in sweat and exhausted from carrying the load for so long, lost all their strength at this gruesome sight. Their legs weakened, one of them collapsing under the weight he carried. Ox secured his special large sword. Looking at these laborers, The secret port wasn't far, just a few miles away. He simply grabbed a hemp rope from one laborer, tied 6 large hemp bags together, and slung them over his shoulder with the rope, his muscular arms visibly bulking up, carrying the load with ease. The laborers gaped in awe. One bag alone weighed at least 70 or 80 pounds. Shotti, no matter how many times he witnessed it, was still shocked by this monster strength. Though Walman was the biggest and had solid strength, being mostly muscular, Ox's physique was fearsome, his body muscles hardened, nearly zero body fat. Simply put, he was dominantly mighty. Finn wouldn't forego paying them, though. Despite becoming a pirate, his nobility still showed. Carrying such heavy loads for over 10 miles, how could we not pay you? Generously. Finn immediately lined 10 silver coins in his hand, offering them to the lead laborer to divide among themselves. This is too much. How can we accept? The leading laborer feared causing a fuss. Stop babbling, take it, and get out. Ox commanded coldly. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The laborers bowed repeatedly, intertwining their fingers in gratitude. Seeing the dead bodies on the ground, they didn't dare stay long and nearly ran away from the scene. What a grand harvest, Ox said, eyeing the bags. How much money is in the treasury? Rain couldn't wait to ask. We need to go back to the ship to count carefully. There are too many scattered silver coins and copper coins. As for the total count, including what you guys have, there are just over 400 golden dragons, maybe around 434. Finn said calmly. This wasn't the most BlackSail had ever earned, but it was definitely the most efficient bounty yet. Minimal investment, short cycle, high return, low risk, a real bloodbath of profit. Damn, Rain didn't know what to say. He was just messing around in London City, and it was insanely easy. What's the point of being a pirate? Respectable folks don't drift at sea. Maybe you should just stick to robbing people here from now on. What's this counting for? Shotti lifted a corner of the burlap sack, exposing the jewelry inside that glittered under the sunlight, and quickly tied the sack back up. We really hit the jackpot. Thank heavens for Lord Swan. Rain crossed his fingers too and bowed toward the sky. This time Lord Swan truly blessed them. People on the East Coast generally worship the Holy Spirit sex wave and storm saint spirit, also known as the endless azure lord. According to Rain, if everyone believed, then it was as if no one believed. For example, when it came to fighting, if everyone believed in him, whom would the old Holy Spirit help? Was he supposed to come down from heaven and mediate? How big a face would that need? Would a deity really care about you? That's why you should worship a different god. His crew wasn't large, and if the Holy Spirit did care, he would give face to this god, mixing it up with the heavenly hosts, backing us up a bit. Rain didn't even know what kind of Holy Spirit Emperor Swan was. It was the deity worshipped in Liss' homeland. Ordinarily, Liss was an atheist and urged crew members not to be superstitious. Religions from the Western continent each boasted more than the next, with deities claiming to overturn the universe and everything in it. After so many years, documented meticulously in the St. Aaron calendar for over 1,000 years, nothing big had ever happened. Stir something up, why don't you? The reason for new magic technique was due to other mystic reasons, not some personified deity. But when asked why there was a god's idol in the captain's cabin, Liss merely replied that one must adhere to ancestral customs, preach one thing, practice another. That wooden sculpture was painstakingly carved by a highly skilled old craftsman after several attempts. This only made the other crew members believe that Emperor Swan was truly powerful, that worshipping him really worked, and they had to worship too. There might still be bounty hunters in ambush. I should head back to the city to help them. They're not aware of the situation yet. You guys shouldn't go. The cargo is most important. After weighing his options, Finn said this candidly and tossed a money bag containing over 300 golden dragons to Rain, who caught it steadily. Are you going to be all right by yourself? Swan asked. You underestimate General Finn too much. I'm most proud of. Before Rain could finish, Fun, not wanting to endure his foolish bragging, had already walked away. Swan said to Shotti. He just said he wouldn't go rescue them. Seeing that there were 2 packs of burlap still unclaimed, Shotti easily picked one up and replied, You should understand by now. These people always say one thing and do another. He thought Rain, being so big, should easily carry 2 sacks, but Shotti just tossed 1 large sack at Rain. However, Rain preferred to go empty-handed. You were the main force this time, scoping out and skinning people, so it makes sense for you to keep the loot. Rain threw the burlap sack back to Shotti, who had boasted that he had learned Qigong in one country, and from his performance in battle, it seemed true. He certainly had the strength. No, no, no. You are both the sailor and the bosun. The hardest worker. It should go to you. Shotti tossed it back again. Ah, yes, 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 that's right. You've been on the ship longer, have more seniority. It's more fitting for you to have it. Ah, yes, yes, yes. London City is so big. You've been running around collecting debts. Collecting from those sharp characters isn't easy, and the weather's been turning cold too. You've had it tougher. You should keep it. You keep it. Please you. Please you. Brother Shotti tall. Brother Rain tough. They were at an impasse for nearly a minute. Ox was about to lose his mind with these two, making a big fuss over nothing. Don't waste time. Ox picked up the remaining burlap sacks, weary of these fools. Rain and Shotti chorused. Brother Ox, both tall and tough. Inside a theater in London City. Liss had originally planned to wrap up his business in London City, hand over the bribe to the sheriff, and then wash his hands of the whole affair. Unexpectedly, he received another order. The sheriff returned the bribe and asked Liss to stay for another month. Lord needed a trustworthy person for a significant job. He had been instructed that if the BlackSail easily wiped out that gambling den, they should take on this job. Liss's first reaction upon hearing this was to outright refuse. If a job was referred to as a significant one by the old hacks like Lao Deng, it probably meant that all of his 10 or so people would get dragged in. That is, until the sheriff mentioned the terms. BlackSail had a notoriously awful reputation by now. It seemed to be on the rise, but it had already hit a ceiling, walking a tightrope. Apart from a few famous pirates at Heavenport, feared throughout the 4 seas, and even owning fleets, Liss was among those at the top of the pirate pyramid. This meant his infamy had spread far, but he was feared merely as a mob of thugs. His wealth and fame were entirely mismatched, marking him as a target. As a pirate floating on the sea without a foundation, he desperately needed to transform. Murder and looting were only the beginning. To advance further, he needed to start trading on a larger scale, and that required connections. Not to mention, Liss was currently under scrutiny from the East Coast governor. If Liss could nail this deal, the lord above the sheriff had an old acquaintance. Liss could get a privateer license from him, and while it might not exactly whitewash the identities of those on his ship, it would offer them a place to hide and a legitimate position. Even with such terms, Liss did not immediately agree. He had also heard of that so-called old acquaintance. The man had a very complex background and was involved in outlandish activities. To put it simply, he was BMA Kingdom, a descendant of the former royal lineage, a known protector of dark forces. Seeking refuge with him meant that no one would dare touch Liss, unless an army was sent after him, something he wasn't influential enough to warrant. The national situation in the BMA Duchy was quite complicated. They harbored a hatred towards the Aran Empire so visceral it was as if they wanted to devour its flesh due to various accumulated grievances that had reached a boiling point. First, the old king was regarded as a hero resisting Aran, who heroically committed suicide in a besieged city, a tale of noble sacrifice. Second, the rightful heir, Philip VI, went to the Aran imperial city for negotiations and was coerced to cede even more territory, refused decisively, and died overseas. He returned only as a corpse in a coffin, much like a tragic figure from the Western continent's own history. Thinking of the old king who died for his principles and the pitiful Philip VI, every BMA person with a shred of pride flew into a rage. Furthermore, there was the currency replacement, the horror of overnight devaluation, which inflicted a drastic reduction in the wealth of the BMA people. Currency is essentially a national guarantee of debt, a certificate issued by the state for labor expended, a debt owed by the country that can be freely exchanged for other labors within the current environment. Now, It was as if the debts owed by the BMA Duchy to its citizens were transferred to being owed to the Aran Empire instead, meaning that the Aran Empire had robbed the entire nation's people of their money. Everyone was now laboring disgracefully and cheaply for the Aran Empire. Those in the city who had some hard currency could still scrape by. As for some inland towns, life was becoming unbearable. Other than some established nobles still hanging on to their territorial enclaves, the BMA Duchy was almost turning into a bandit state. Everywhere there were bandits and desperados, messily clustered together. The BMA Duchy's east coast had several ice-free ports, allowing trade with the Far East Islands, attracting many foreign traders willing to take their chances, which only added to the chaos. One could only imagine the plight of the common people. The current puppet king was also an imbecile, propped up yet earnestly believing himself to be significant. Liss was certain it wouldn't be long before the king faced a downfall. Taking this opportunity with BMA Kingdom might not be the first wave out of heaven, but it was still at the initial stage of a major trend, a good opportunity indeed. At the entrance of a theater, Liss and his 3 companions had just wrapped up their business and stepped outside. That caveman is playing coy, won't say what the job is, wants us to stay here for another month. Walman was puzzled. Although the terms were indeed irresistible, Liss had agreed without even asking what the job entailed, making Walman suspect it might be some kind of scapegoating trap. A privateer license is nothing but a verbal promise, and my acceptance was just as noncommittal. We're still short on sailors on the ship, and we can't leave right away anyway. Might as well agree to it for now. Liss was shrewd. He hadn't managed to give away the bribe he'd originally intended to offer, and now he had an additional 30 gold dragons as an advance payment. It was stupid not to take the free money, a sign that the job must indeed be significant. It's just that staying too long poses problems with bounty hunters and the Navy. Walman, since the Great Wetland uprising had been quelled, had lost all trust in any noble. They were nothing but marks. Get tangled with them, and it was a death trap. No match for these cold-blooded, deceitful scum. Brother Shah is with us. 1,000 men come at us, and each of us takes one. He slaughters 990. Liss casually spoke. Thanks a lot. Morrison was nonchalant. You really think too highly of me. Not far from the theater, they ran into Fun hurrying their way. Why have you come back? Liss immediately sensed trouble. Fun shared his news. Bounty hunters had set their sights on the BlackSail, but Ox and Rain had already chopped them up. Damn, assassins coming after us so soon? We've really become notorious, Liss muttered in silence, then added, no worries, just small fry. We can handle it. Besides, has Swan come around? Fun nodded, thinking it was also time to lay things out clear with the crew. That's good. Even if he doesn't get it, he has to. If it wasn't for your face, I would have chopped him up by now. Tonight's a triple celebration. We definitely need to prepare some solid dishes. Liss spoke with a serious tone. 3 pieces of good news? Fun was genuinely interested. The casino heist had been quite a windfall. That was one piece of good news. For the other crew members, Swan's issue was considered another. But what was the third? Liss spoke of the privateer license and the BMA Kingdom business. Fun's poker face betrayed no thoughts, but after pausing for a few seconds, he said, 2.5 pieces of good news, I'd say. Liss caught on to the subtlety in the reply. Anyway, no decisions have been made yet. He needed to talk to Fun in private again. Swan, what about the thief? Morrison asked casually. Even a blind man could see his skills. Is he putting down a security deposit or what? Walman speculated. Pirates weren't playing house. You couldn't just hop on board with a word. Common sailors and deckhands were one thing, but core members had to present an oath of loyalty. Either peel a noble, a titled noble without lands would do, or it was going to revolve around money. Since Swan came on board, he had been stalling. If it weren't for Fun vouching for him, he would have been chopped up long ago. Over 2 months had passed without a token gesture, and discontent was growing among the crew. Liss nearly spat out blood. The ship was full of old dogs from all over, perhaps not cultured much, but with insight as high as a 7- or 8-story building. They had all seen through it. You two lay off for now. Suffice to say, it's good news. Time to pop the champagne. Liss led his group back to the ship. Dusk was falling. The sea erosion, cliff, giant cave, secret port. The water shimmered. On a pier only a meter taller than the sea level, dim torches were fixed onto wooden posts for light. Inside the cave, more than 10 ships were docked, including some of the London city nobles' smuggling ships and other not-so-clean vessels. Among them was Liss's SS Fuma, catching revenge. It was named so because Liss thought it complemented frost rhododendron blood-crying nicely. The SS Fuma catching revenge was 46 meters in length, with a displacement of 480 tons. But the cave was dark, and with no lanterns lit aboard the ship, only a corner was visible by torchlight. There were many fierce-looking people on the pier, including pirates and smugglers' guards, but they all cleared the way when they saw Liss and his group approaching. There was a man named Archer on board who was guarding their ship. He had already killed a few troublemakers in the past 2 days. He was incredibly skilled, probably a match even for a gold-level adventurer. But the ship's doctor was easier to deal with. Inquiries revealed the recently notorious BlackSail pirate gang, who had killed the entire household of the Blue Bay port lord, the desperados among desperados. The group of 4 ascended the gangway onto the deck of the SS Fuma, catching revenge. The voice arrived before the man was seen. "Return, Brother Shah, my proudest belief." The distinctive hoarse voice of a werewolf was unmistakable. "Hold on," Morrison yelled abruptly, startling several men on deck who were playing cards by the light of a lantern. Then Morrison added, as clear as day, "I've forgotten, and my tears, they flow without reason." "Hold on," Liss shouted, adding, "I vaguely remember. I've forgotten there was something compelling, forgotten." Then, all 3 of them started singing in unison, "Beat back the enemies, wipe out the Navy." With that, they grabbed cups of alcohol from the table and began to chug, lighting the main lantern on the ship for illumination. Then they started dancing around the mast like a group performing a ritual dance, breaking into a pirate song popular along the East Coast. "Brethren of all paths, come join the fold. With scimitar in hand, carry sound fire on your back. No need to dodge the guillotine, share the bounty. You and me dare to gamble life. Fortune multiplies." Since it was a day for sharing spoils, the 3 were in a state of excitement. Fun was exasperated. Was this some sort of musical theater? The real drama, where a few might die on the ship, would come later, especially because of the terrifying things Swan had stolen from the Thief Guild. He ignored the 3 fools. Everyone had to be present tonight. After canvassing the deck, it appeared all those who had left to handle business had also returned. Archer, as usual, was stone drunk, red-faced and oblivious to the world, the very image of a drunken immortal according to Liss. Low-level Demon Haywood was playing cards with Swan and Shotti. One person was still missing. "Where's the doctor?" Fun asked Haywood. Haywood, too hideous to behold unmasked, never removed his helmet. "At the brothel," the blood-red-skinned Haywood responded. "Again at the brothel?" Fun was astonished. Last time when there was a killing, he had been at the brothel. The time before, when Shotti was cornered in Heaven Port, he had been at the brothel. When the whole Blue Bay port lord's family was killed, he was at the local brothel too. According to Liss, he must really be some sort of master player, or even the king all in. Fun was completely resigned, left to wait for his return. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say tonight would decide the fate of the BlackSail pirates, whether it be the privateer license mentioned by Liss or the matter Swan was involved with. The impact was far-reaching. This was no petty piracy or murder. This time the stakes were truly high. Inside London City, due to rampant prostitution and reckless gambling, Mika's money had dwindled to almost nothing. In London City, there were 2 types of brothels. One was the middle to high-class establishments protected by nobles, complete with song and dance performances and fine food and drink facilities. The other, which mirrored the current depression of Bima Duchy, was nothing more than cellars set up by ruffians, best left unmentioned. Mika couldn't afford the first type, but he also looked down on the latter. He was experienced and knew that in times like these, there were many whores desperate for work. Seeing someone on the street selling flowers for the high price of 30 copper coins, it was almost certain they were orchestrated by a pimp. Are we there yet? An old crone was leading Mika through the dilapidated region on the outskirts of London City, winding left and right through crowded buildings. Mika was growing impatient as a light rain began to fall from the sky. We're close. Finally, the old woman led Mika down a dim alleyway, through a passage, and up a rickety, narrow, squeaky staircase into a second-floor apartment. The old crone knocked a unique pattern on the door. Footsteps sounded from inside, and the door cracked open, restrained by a rusty chain, revealing an old woman and a man. Without a word, the woman from within unfastened the chain and opened the door. Mika looked the woman up and down. She was around 30, her features fairly fine, and although a bit thin, she was acceptable. Her hair was the shade of brown he liked, and she was only wearing a nightgown. After paying the old woman 5 copper coins, Mika entered the room. Unexpectedly, there was another man sitting on the floor smoking. At first, Mika thought it was a setup. He reached for the short-handled axe at his waist, ready to strike, but upon closer inspection, he noticed that the man's sleeve was empty, missing an arm. Noticing someone enter, the man hesitated only for an instant before tactfully picking up his crutch and awkwardly hobbling out of the room, closing the door behind him. The place was just a small room with no bathroom or kitchen, about 10 square meters with a bed. The wall so thin one could easily guess it was a large room subdivided with plywood into rental cubicles. Only Mika and the woman remained inside the dimly lit room, barely illuminated by an oil lamp. Mika sat down on the bed, removing his wide-brimmed hat. He sported a few millimeters of stubble, his curly hair beginning to streak with gray. His nose was prominent, his eye sockets deep, and his gray-blue eyes shifted across the woman's body. "I'll go get you a glass of water." "No need," Mika said, not out of discrimination, but rather wariness. If the last customer was like that, it was best to be cautious. "Who was that man?" "That was my husband. Sorry to embarrass you." Mika fell silent for a moment. "You are rather good-looking. This can't be true." Mika knew all too well that in this business, whether it mattered or not, there was rarely truth spoken. Missing an arm, that man was effectively disabled here, and without care, would be dead in the streets before long. "Is that so? You might not believe it, but once we had our glory days, he was a Navy sailor. Then a pirate took his arm, and now he can barely walk. I'm the one who takes care of him now." The woman spoke as if it were nothing out of the ordinary, casually undressing while she talked. Under the flickering oil lamp, there was a hint of allure. Mika fell silent again. Suddenly, I remember having urgent matters to attend to. Mika put on his hat and left 30 copper coins on the bed as payment. The woman hadn't a chance to speak before he pushed through the door and left. The disabled man sat smoking in the hallway on the stairs, his one-armed silhouette in the dim passageway as eerie as a ghost. He seemed surprised to see Mika leaving so quickly. Mika didn't dare meet his gaze and hurried away from the building as if fleeing. Over an hour later, Mika returned to the ship and saw the deck deserted. Seeing light through the windows of the navigation room at the bow, he knew there was a meeting. He scanned the room with a glance. Most had arrived, yet no one noticed him. Because Rain was there, boasting about the day's events, with a storytelling flair so captivating it was a waste he wasn't a bard. Everyone was listening intently. "I damn near died, I swear." The swordsman had some skills, a sword coming from the west, like the heavenly flying immortal, swift as lightning, wild as the windswept sands. With just a flash of cold light, the attack was all-consuming. My spirit shook, and at that moment, I activated the Transmute's Freedom method. Transcendent and timeless, I displayed my might. This invincible method is the pinnacle of immortal arts, boastful and supreme in this world. With me, Rain, the heavens are within reach. Rain was holding a roll-your-own cigarette, animated as he spoke, though his hair was greasy and unkempt, carrying a certain odor. Yet everyone on the ship was well aware that the He Transmutes Freedom method was justly boasting of the Emperor's skill he allegedly practiced, sounding impressive in name, but never once seen in a real fight, still having to rely on his swinging great hammer and the sinister tool residing in his left hand. Can you ever be serious? Shotti was too weak to complain. Mika noticed that a few people were still missing. The captain, the first officer, and the newly arrived Tiger Man weren't there, probably discussing matters elsewhere. Rain was still bragging on. Anyway, that guy knew he was screwed, quickly called out to his comrades, but what showed up was Ox holding 2 pieces of corpse. If his comrades were to come back from the dead, they would probably write the word miserable on his leg. Right then, he lost all hope, and while he was dazed, I cleanly snapped off his arm with a crack, totally crippling him. Ox was about to question him about some things, but this bastard still had some damn pride, refusing to submit to the very end. So, there he was, heart cold and spirit soaring, life and death both uncertain. Rain smacked his lips while smoking and didn't forget to add a casual interjection. Damn. Low-level Demon Haywood, serving as the crew's exemplary tool, had already packed up all the loot. Only distribution was left. The rules on the ship were simple. If the total earnings were under 300 golden dragons, half would go to the common fund, the rest divided evenly. If earnings exceeded 300 golden dragons, 200 would be for the common fund, with the remainder shared. The common fund covered everything from provisions and sailor wages to ship maintenance, keeping a pirate ship in normal operation. Any additional purchases or extra crew recruitment, and indeed any extra expenses, if these required more than what was in the common fund, had to be approved by crew voting, where Liss' vote counted as 2 and everyone else's counted as 1. The ledger was with fun, available for verification at any time. At that moment, Morrison glanced at the doorway. Mika was hesitantly standing there, not coming in, seemingly caught up in something. The highly esteemed and self-disciplined ship's doctor has returned. Morrison always sharpened his flying knife on a whetstone, his speech ever sardonic. Mika let out an awkward chuckle and found a seat. The table was laden with hearty dishes. The ship's cook, Archer, knowing there was a feast that night, slaughtered a sheep from the ship's hold and prepared a whole sheep feast ahead of time, along with dried meat and some dips. Not a single vegetable was in sight. Moreover, the ship was never short on alcohol, as Archer regularly drank himself into a stupor without depleting the stock. Such a spread was luxurious enough that lower-tier nobles might not enjoy such a feast even once a month. Archer was always out of it, summed up in 4 words: cooking, killing, drinking, sleeping, nothing more, nothing less. Now, he was nearly at the sleeping phase. Mika, skilled in reading the room, noticed some off expressions despite the festive occasion to divide the booty. Ox, Rain, Shotti, and Walman all had a stern look in their eyes, clearly concealing something. "How's it going?" Walman asked Mika with a meaningful look, closing the Acania travelogue in his hands. "What do you mean, how's it going?" Mika was clueless. "Talking about the whore, of course. Was she any good?" Walman teased. "What good would that be? Same old story." Mika laughed it off. Ox's tone suddenly turned solemn, his special large sword standing to one side, and he bluntly said to Mika, "I don't know what's going to happen later, but you ought to know where you should stand." Ox thought it was time to lay Swan's issue on the table. If not taking the oath of loyalty, at least giving Finn a couple of months' grace. Now with the big job done, there had to be some clarity. Since Liss, Fun, and Swan were not present, they were probably discussing what would happen later. The atmosphere in the room grew more somber. Except for the heavily drunken Archer and Morrison, Mika suddenly felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. Ox was one of the few reliable people on the ship, a man of his word, never one for stale jokes, and he had never been seen joking around. What's the big deal? Mika had been on the ship for quite some time and had only seen this kind of atmosphere 3 or 4 times. One could possibly die. Ox's tone was grave beyond doubt. And in this room, the one whose word carried weight was only Morrison. "Don't be so tense. Liss has his head on straight. Popping champagne is more likely." Morrison glanced at Ox. That's why decent folks shouldn't be pirates, he thought, always paranoid, living on the edge of the knife, just too exhausting. "Let's hope so." Walman remained non-committal. At that moment, Liss entered, his expression unusually serious. The navigation room is essentially the central hub of a ship, acting as the control room for officers on a ship with strict discipline. But on the SS Fuma Kaching Revenge, it serves as the core backbone of the card room and middle-aged activity center. The Honorable Doctor has also arrived. Now everyone is here, Liss said calmly. Surrounded by high-quality peach with long table procured from the Lord's house in Blue Bay Port, filled with people, the teal silk tablecloth and some silver where accentuated the upscale setting. However, those seated were either dirty and messy like rain or had an unpleasant appearance like Morrison. Shipwright, Haywood, a former member of the demon god Agar's Dagon Expeditionary Army. Shipwright, Shotti, a former arms dealer. Chef, Archer, a former Guion Kingdom court chef. Ship doctor, Mika, a former executioner and forensic doctor at Chintzy Port of the Aran Empire. Quartermaster, Walman, a former officer of the Southern Wetlands Rebel Army. Sailor, Rain, a former vice lieutenant of the Starving Wolf Adventure Group. Ship gunner, Morrison, of unknown origin. Second officer, Ox, a first-class war criminal of the Mirror Sea Alliance. First officer, Fun, a first-class political prisoner from the Pedant Kingdom. Captain Liss from outer space, a cosmic person. I won't babble on. Liss scratched his ear and added, the jewelry has been appraised, about 120 golden dragons. We have not found a channel for sale yet. Let's divide the clean money first. Liss gestured to Fun, who had already prepared the accounts, and began to recite by the book, following the old rule. Beyond 300 gold coins, 200 gold coins were taken as normal expenses, leaving a total of 276 gold coins. Each person received 25 gold coins, and the remaining 1 gold coin was also taken as expenditure. As Fun finished speaking, Haywood distributed the already tied money bags to everyone on the table. Each bag was heavy, roughly the size of a human head, containing both gold coins and silver coins. 25 golden dragons were enough to buy a decent residence in a well-secured big city in these chaotic times. One could live a worry-free life for 5 to 6 years, if not squandering on prostitutes, gambling, or consuming hallucinogenic alchemical products. But everyone present had seen their fair share of big scenes. They were all desperate, and the money would only bring peace if spent in Heavenport, wasted on pleasures and gone in a few months, with no apparent joy on their faces. After the division of spoils, should anyone have suggestions or dissatisfaction with this delivery, you may speak up. Fun also placed the ledger on the table for all to see. No one spoke, as the rules had long been established. Archer, do you have any objections? Fun looked at Archer speechlessly, as the main event was about to start, and his mind was still a mess. Blurrily propping his head, Archer slurred with a drunken tongue. Annihilate who? Oh, everyone's here. Let's eat, don't just drink. Feeling somewhat sobered up, Archer blew into the bottle a few times, then seemed to remember something and began to wail loudly, with tears and snot. Liss clicked his tongue, making more noise than men Jiang cry. You better rest, Fun said helplessly. Since there are no objections, let's consider this matter settled. Fun and Swan also sat down, but had little appetite looking at the mutton on the table. Just as Liss was about to sit. First officer, don't you have something to say? With one statement from Ox, everyone's faces darkened, and Mika, recalling what he had mentioned earlier, was also confused. He decided to take a sip of liquor to calm his nerves first. Say what? Liss picked up the conversation, aware that it was the crew challenging issues related to Swan. Of course, I should say auspicious words. On a festive day, it's proper to say auspicious words. Since no one volunteered to be the alcohol commander, I'll reluctantly take the role this time. Ox's special large sword was leaning against the wall, just 60 centimeters away from him. With his stature, he could reach it just by reaching out. The so-called alcohol commander is the person who leads in drinking, ensuring that no one awkwardly abstains. Great! The second officer will also have his share of auspiciousness today. Morrison smiled sinisterly, purely enjoying the spectacle. He truly didn't care about Swan's trivial matters. Indeed, he had heard that the Thief Guild on the East Shore had captured a tiger man alive, causing a huge commotion. Many of the recent murder victims had been Tigermen. It didn't matter whether it was Swan or not. But the problem was he had concealed this information. Fin likely knew as well, and to reveal it now would break the ethical code and the rules aboard the ship. Rain looked impassive, but he was inwardly delighted, as he had always had a low opinion of the Thief Guild's petty thieves. "How do you propose we drink?" Liss was somewhat in a headache. He had hoped that, after the atmosphere warmed up, Fin would come clean on his own. Ox deliberated his wording before saying, "You know, Swan has been here for more than 2 months now, and he hasn't had a welcoming ceremony yet. I'll drink with him one-on-one." Fin and Swan's faces immediately looked as somber as water. On a pirate ship, there's no such thing as goodwill, and you never know what others are thinking. Tonight, someone might indeed die. Swan lit a cigarette and watched Ox calmly. Shotti, Walman, and the others kept silent, understanding that this matter indeed needed some resolution and couldn't be easily dismissed. "Haywood, please go to the storeroom and get 2 basins, the wooden kind we use for smoked meat. Transfer the meat to another basin." Ox, as the second officer, issued the orders. Haywood, not dallying, soon brought 2 basins, each with a capacity of at least 10 liters. Ox didn't waste words. His way of opening bottles was extremely violent. Using his hands, he snapped off the tops of the bottles, including the glass, causing everything to splash into the basin. He snapped open dozens of bottles in a row, scattering glass shards all over the floor and cutting his hand in the process. With each bottle opened, the expressions of those present darkened further. In the end, dozens of bottles of fiercely fermented spirits from various crops, mixed together in the 2 half-full large wooden basins. Mika's eyelids twitched. This was seriously intense. Now in exile himself, he was still shocked by the reckless style of these outlaws. Ox pushed one of the wooden basins in front of Swan and said coldly, "Just the 2 of us for this round." With that, Ox lifted the basin and began to chug, not spilling a single drop. An excruciating 20-some seconds. Even for Ox with his gaping maw, it took nearly half a minute, and when he finished, he wiped his mouth, tipping the basin upside down to show only a few drops left, indicating he had finished it completely. Shotti was deeply shaken. It really seemed like someone was about to die. Everyone's eyes turned to Swan, who stared emotionlessly at the wooden basin for a few seconds. "What do you look down on me? Consider this your initiation drink," Ox stated flatly. Liss gasped, impressed by Ox's level of bluntness. He was truly ruthless. It was said that 3 joys come to the door, but surely some explanation was needed since, after all, rules were iron laws. "Swan, don't dampen our spirits here." Rain, looking mournful, began to stir the pot. Fin frowned too. This idiot's choices of words were also adding to the conflict. Scared of this little bowl of alcohol, Ox rested one hand on the table, the other raised to reach for his special large sword. Fin was about to stand up and end it all, seeing as how the lithe and agile Swan had no chance matching with Ox in a drinking contest. It'd be quicker just to finish it. Yet Swan stopped Fin, scared of dying, let alone drinking. Without hesitation, Swan picked up the wooden basin with both hands and began to chug furiously. Mika held his forehead. Surely someone was bound to die. Ox Rain and his group roasted Swan over the fire. Any normal person would know, no matter how high their alcohol tolerance, consuming that much would fry their brain if it didn't kill them. Ox had once been a general in the Mirror Sea Alliance, famed among the merfolk for his bravery, and even before his disgrace, he had been a figure of note, further augmented by his racial talents, and there were few in BMA Duchy who could outdrink him. With his thief constitution, all enhanced for stealth, Swan was practically begging for death. But as he was roasted, his temper flared, and he grabbed the basin and chugged. In those excruciatingly long 20 seconds, as Swan drank half, he started to falter, his hands trembling as he held the wooden basin, and his throat turned a bloody red as if scorched by fire. "That's about enough." Fin stopped Swan. Swan, however, ignored him and continued drinking fiercely. Ox watched calmly and even gained a new respect for Swan. "Good. Tough." Rain, fearing Swan wouldn't die drinking, continued to roast him. Liss saw things spiraling out of control, worried about a disaster if they didn't ease off now, cursing the situation as if blessings were provoking turmoil. The Thieves' Guild on the East Shore is capturing the Tiger Man alive, and it has to be Swan. Liss suddenly said, giving Finn the face he was due. Everyone present looked at him. Their expressions showed no surprise, only that their suspicions were confirmed. Liss forcefully snatched the basin, now 2/3 empty, from Swan's hand, starting to chug himself, but craftily spilled most of it. Barely half a cup likely entered his stomach before he quickly inverted the basin to cover it, thus ending this round of drinking. Finn's expression finally eased, but Swan was nearly unconscious, much like Archer, silent and collapsed in his chair, stubbornly enduring. I see. Ox shifted his tone. We all know the origins of the many here on the ship, and knowing so, we know how to deal with each. As for the ship gunner, indeed, he was a homeless man with no legal issues, very clean. I thank you for that. Morrison smiled, uglier than crying, while eating a grilled lamb leg and watching the drama unfold. Ox continued, It's only been 2 months, and the Thief Guild has clues, having turned the East Shore upside down. And now we're just talking about it. Isn't it a bit late? There has to be an explanation. Well said. Rain clapped his hands in approval. We can't break the rules. Walman solemnly agreed. Liss was silent for a while, then said, The explanation is fun, you tell them. Finn picked up 2 bags and slammed them heavily on the table. The explanation is Swan stole a highly valuable treasure from the Thief Guild and has agreed to show it. During this time, he wanted to see if he could trust us to withstand the Thief Guild's assassins. I'll speak plainly. If you see what Swan stole, you're stuck with the BlackSail until death because it's too precious and can bring disaster. Anyone who wants out, we'd have to kill. With that statement, even the usually irreverent Shotti and Mika had a menacing look in their eyes. Suddenly, the entire room reeked of gunpowder, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Even Ox was somewhat stunned. The BlackSail pirates had plundered everything, even stealing the wedding gifts intended for the minister's son in BMA Duchy. Could Finn really have taken things this far? Damn. Rain held his forehead, knowing that tonight would be intense. But he hadn't expected it to go this far. Liss knew every crew member's mind like the back of his hand, knowing that none would leave. They were stubborn as eczema, not easily shaken off. He said, Anyone who wants to leave can still do so. Finn and I have discussed it. All public funds can be used as severance pay. Including what's in our personal pouches, we've got over 100 golden dragons. We'll divide it among anyone who wants to leave. Liss had made his point clear. With over 300 golden dragons, one could buy a small official position in the BMA Duchy, mix into the ranks of the Baron, an honor, nonetheless, and get a salary that could help them recover their investment. Is all this necessary? Haywood tried to make peace. Without the BlackSail, his identity as a demon was unlivable. After all these years, living through life and death together, since Swan has brought out the artifact, it should be considered turning over a new leaf. Finn tapped the table with 2 fingers, dismissing Haywood's words and adding, This is no longer about the oath of loyalty. This thing must not see the light of day. Not a single piece of information can get out, so even the Thief Guild is keeping it under wraps. Even those thieves who came after Swan probably don't know what Swan stole. Liss chimed in, We've all heard of the Thief Guild's reputation. Drugging women and turning them into addicts, running brothels, or breaking the limbs of the elderly and children and throwing them on the streets to beg. The lowest of the low, they don't shy away from swindling, kidnapping, murder, and even political assassinations. Their influence spreads across various domains and multiple countries. Not an exaggeration to call them one of the strongest organizations in the underworld, and they will now stop at nothing to get to us. After a moment of intense, oppressing silence, who on this ship isn't already a wanted man, gambling with their life? Who would fear being hunted down? Ox, not a man to shy away from trouble, having accepted the situation, sat down. If that thing was so valuable that it could save Swan's life, then there was nothing more to say. What treasure is it? Let's have a look. Who here is afraid of dying? Walman's tone carried a hint of aggression. a first since he'd been on board. A drowsy archer, also inebriated, fumbled with his words. "Who are you trying to scare? Bring it out and let us have a look." Liss scanned the eager faces around him, Rain, Shotti, and others licking their lips in anticipation. This is an established law of the BlackSail pirate group. From now on, any officer who wishes to leave will be hunted down by others. This rule is now firmly in place. Liss continued. "Fun, display the artifact. Let everyone take a good look. Morrison, keep an eye out." Despite Liss' conviction that no one would abandon ship, he took precautions and had Morrison maintain order, knowing well the ragtag bunch of fugitives from all over the world might succumb to greed and attempt a sole possession. Some precious treasure causing such a stir. If what you bring out doesn't meet everyone's expectations, first officer, you might not live it down. Standing up, Morrison, aware that no one aboard was lacking in skill, except, of course, the tool, Haywood, solemnly placed his hand on his whip blade. Swan was completely drunk, sprawled over the table and snoring, all while Fin held the fort. With a light chuckle, Fin began to tell a far-fetched story of ancient history. A legend states that 2,000 years ago, the overlord who completely conquered the western continent and ended the dark, chaotic times, wore the emperor's crown at his coronation ceremony. Its base made of holy radiance platinum, with a chain pendant refining all the immortal diamonds in the world, while also ornamented with 24 priceless gemstones that were masterpieces of the divine craftsman. Fin picked up one of the bags and released 2 diamonds shining brilliantly. Even in a room lit only by oil lamps, these 2 stones radiated breathtaking splendor, one displaying an endless lushness of the Chewinching mountain range almost dizzying in its verdant green, the other pulsing with a captivating deep blue like the heart of the sea, as if crafted by a divine craftsman. The myriad faceted surfaces refracted and swirled with brilliance, almost like a curse artifact, possessing some irresistible grand magic power, capturing the soul and making it impossible to look away. 2 of the 24 right here. Rain's saliva flowed freely, and he couldn't help but reach for the gemstone. Bang! Morrison's large hand pressed down on the 2 stones. The halo around the gemstone instantly vanished, and he was also slightly lost, but quickly recovered, calmly saying, "We can only look at it for now." Everyone present was shocked, as the jewels from the vault were nothing compared to this, a truly invaluable divine object. There was no need to verify its authenticity. One glance was enough to completely captivate the soul. These 2 stones were authentic, celestial objects mounted on the overlord crown from ancient times. Damn, how much could this sell for? Rain was dumbfounded, looking at Swan, who was drunkenly sprawled out, possessing such a huge audacity to steal this object. "You're really brain-dead," said Shotti, regaining his composure. "This is a priceless treasure." The rest inhaled sharply. Wouldn't the thief guild chase them to the ends of the earth, to a cruel paradise? Liss said, "Honestly speaking, these 2 stones can't be sold. No one dares to accept them, knowing they belong to the thief guild. No one on the black market of the western continent dares to buy it. If someone with godly wealth and unreasonable courage offered a sky-high price, it's one thing. If not, they can only be kept for another purpose. And what Swan stole includes something else that absolutely cannot be revealed, a rare object indeed. There's something even heavier?" Walman felt like he was dreaming. Was this not the most impressive yet? Damn, Mika originally thought that BlackSail had reached its limit. Just stabilize and sail steadily for a few more years, earn life savings and retire in luxury, and then it would be time to lay low. He thought that when the political landscape of the western continent was reconfigured and the uproar settled, the fugitives like him would no longer be pursued and could finally live peacefully. But he realized they were sinking deeper, and now there was no turning back. Archer began to weep at the sight of the gemstone. "Don't cry yet. You might not understand the value of this object, but I still need to briefly explain." Fin then opened the bag slightly, revealing just a corner of an unknown dark material, the black steel. Due to the oppressive aura of the object, he bled black blood from his nose. Fin chanted a spell, and a gray thick fog that couldn't be dissipated appeared in his palm, winding and enveloping the black steel, partially isolating its aura. Yet, even so, it was as if thousands of ferocious spirits were trapped inside, howling. The oil lamps in the room flickered erratically. A bone-chilling cold from a vast emptiness crept up their backs, accompanied by an invisible gale swirling stealthily. Not just Fun, but others were also affected to varying degrees. Clutching at their foreheads, supporting their heads, a moment of disorientation, with sharp, piercing train whistle-like noises assaulting their ears, causing dizziness and blurred vision. Shotti supported himself against the wall, unable to even keep his eyes open. Walman scratched at his skin, trying to stay alert. The condition of the others was even more severe. Captain Liss was also enduring. The entity residing in his left hand became unstable, urging Fun to quickly put it away. Yet when Liss shouted out, his voice seemed erased, leaving complete silence in the room, with not a hint of sound, only a silent, rampant scream from a distant netherworld. However, the bag had only been opened for 2 or 3 seconds. Fun quickly tied up the bag filled with sealing demon stones, made a tight knot with a rope, and wiped off his nosebleed. Those present hadn't even recovered yet, barely catching a glimpse of what was inside the bag, only seeing a corner of pitch darkness. As the aura vanished, the netherworld whispers swept past their ears, dissipating like a dream, and they suddenly snapped back to reality, panting heavily. Fun explained, "This thing, I've only seen it in a banned book section of the Peta National Library, in an old illustrated manual called Ancient Era Curse Device Compendium. Because it was featured on the most climactic pages, the impression was deep. This is a fragment of the netherworld steel, rumored that once fully assembled, it can open the gate of netherworld, commanding countless resentful souls and various demons from this world. Invincible in attack and undefeatable in battle. Dominating the Western continent wouldn't be an exaggeration. As for more descriptions, there are none recorded. It's one of the most dominating devices from a lost history. A king's device indeed." The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Fun tossed both bags to Liss, signaling that these 2 items now belonged to the entire BlackSail pirates, the price being that everyone had to withstand the relentless pursuit of the Thief Guild on behalf of Swan. "I told you, there were 3 pieces of good news. We have a big job done, got the privateer license, and the new rules are nailed down. No one can run now. What are we waiting for? Pop the champagne." Liss, seeing the completely befuddled crowd, hurriedly tried to liven up the atmosphere. No, Shotti hadn't come back to his senses yet. The netherworld steel? The netherworld steel? The netherworld steel? The netherworld steel? Rain frantically repeated, though unclear of its significance. He was profoundly shaken. Liss, a streak of frustration across his forehead, responded, "Yes, the netherworld steel, at least according to that crappy book Fun read. Now, no one can leave the ship without us having to kill them." Walman said so, his eyes harboring deeply buried madness, thinking he was destined to rot following Liss for life. But reclaiming the southern wetlands was not impossible. Ox still had a stern expression, lost in thought. Mika had long accepted his fate in exile, muttering, "After all, the worst thing is to die on the streets. Come on, it's just a broken thief guild and a broken steel. I'm hungry, let's eat." Morrison spoke with conviction. Fun saw that the situation had somewhat stabilized and let down his guard, relieved that no one had died, at least not yet. "Mika, go see if Swan is dead. He seems to have stopped breathing," Shotti said. Mika hurried over, checked the pulse, and found it still lively. "He's fine. I'll just go down to the pharmacy and get some sobering herbal soup." "I'll go with you," Ox said calmly. "You don't trust me?" Mika, speechless, vaguely guessed what Ox was thinking, that he might try to slip away. "It's always good to be cautious." Ox turned to the others and said, "Swan has submitted his oath of loyalty, so the rules on this ship have never been broken until now. Since the captain has issued new orders, they are ironclad. If there's any screw-up later, don't blame me for turning on you. If anyone's planning to flee or sell information, you'll pay with your life." Ox made his stance clear from the start. Come on, it's just a broken thief guild and a broken steel. Liss echoed Morrison's words, adding, we are so united, embodying friendship, effort, and victory. A fiery dream team, full of honor and knightly spirit. The rules are in place. Don't keep bringing them up, or I'll accuse you of demoralizing. As the captain, I declare that since Ox can't speak auspiciously, his role as alcohol commander is revoked tonight, and I'll take over. Auspicious words. Tonight we party and speak auspiciously. Ox. Liss raised his glass, starting a classic Scottish drinking joke session, and led by Rain, the crew began to get rowdy. We are pirates' pests. Ugh, the richest pests of pirates. Oh, recently doing tasks for noble masters. Ugh, directly earned 500 golden dragons. Oh, Swan just came on board and didn't submit his oath of loyalty. Ugh, has been holding back for 2 months. Oh, the thief guild wants to kill me. When Liss said these words, no one echoed him. Indeed, this was the imminent danger they faced. I'll go directly and take refuge with BMA Kingdom. Oh, done. Return my soul. Return. Thief guild leader Diaz comes from all sides. Hey, we haven't toasted a Lord Guan yet. Everyone toast to Lord Guan. May Lord Guan exterminate the entire cursed thief guild. That's not a blessing. That's a curse killing. Are you looking for a way to kill Diaz? I got a 0 score in the game of finding Diaz's relatives. You should try it too. Then the navigation room burst into exuberant drinking, dancing wildly, playing outdated jokes, nearly turning into madman mode on forums. Everyone channeling Archer and Rain, with only Finn keeping it together. Hopeless. Ox shook his head and went with Mika to get the sobering soup for Swan. 2,000 meters underground. Dark Matter Research Institute. The tunnels, carved by modern machinery, still had droplets of water clinging to the walls. The pale light of the industrial lamps shone on the steel framework of the pier as students wearing visitor badges and research coats walked past it one after another. What's wrong with you? A college girl with light golden hair and azure eyes asked Liss. At that moment, Liss seemed extremely odd. It was like I had a really long dream, so vivid. 10 years have gone by, no. In that world, there were 16 months in a year, so more than a decade. Liss stood there, dazed, looking around. It was indeed a nightmare. An eternity each day, scheming, living on the edge, killing like hemp, completely transformed into another person. At this time, he had no beard. His face was clean without any horrifying wounds. An exchange student who had traveled to North America and was now visiting the Dark Matter Research Institute. Since it was a rare opportunity, the university organized all the best students from the engineering departments who had come from all over the world, nearly filling up the institute. Because a more advanced Dark Matter Research Institute had become operational, the one they were visiting had its secrecy lifted and was semi-open to the public. Are you, Sharon? Liss placed his hands on her shoulders. It was indeed nostalgic, indescribable, this experience of reuniting with someone from a past life whom he had an ambiguous relationship with. It was too strange. I thought it was impossible. There was a malfunction in the institute, the terrifying spells of a dimensional mage, hunting down all the unstable souls across dimensions. It was finally over, Liss thought. It was all a dream. All the students here had been hunted down and taken to a different world, imprisoned in the northern prison as materials for that magician. It was all fantasy. Sharon's face began to dissolve. Of course it is real. Have you forgotten? After the riot broke out in the prison, we all got separated. The magician is still looking for us. The entire world is hunting us down. Now, only you can save me. The entire institute started to burn, turning everything into ash. And there was some violent banging sound, as if to tear the entire space apart. London City, Secret Port, see Erosion Cliff Giant Cave. Morning. Amidst the violent knocking, Liss, hung over, suddenly woke from the nightmare. He sat up abruptly and gasped as if he had been suffocating for 10,000 years. His chest heaved violently, and his back was covered in cold sweat. Who is it? Liss pulled out the dagger from beside his pillow and stared warily at the door. Fin knocked a few times on the door of the captain's quarters without response and pushed the door open. "Who is Sharon?" Fin heard Liss muttering that name in his confusion. Seeing who it was, Liss breathed a sigh of relief. His head throbbed painfully, a memory gap from drinking too much the night before. "Who is Sharon?" Fin raised another question, a somewhat sensitive one that seemed to resemble a woman's name. In his opinion, the current crew of BlackSail ought to sever all ties with the outside world, especially since they were harboring a rare artifact. Safeguards were necessary. When Swan first sought refuge with Fin considered leaving the ship to start anew. But where could he go? Besides, even surrendering the gemstone and steel wouldn't absolve him of his sins. There were some transgressions that nothing in the world could wash away. How much could one or two strong individuals achieve, no matter how tough they were? Like nailing jelly to a wall. In the end, one must appreciate the importance of power. After much thought, he decided to stay with BlackSail. The seas were always the safest place, and there were others to share the blame and resist the pursuit of the Thief Guild. Moreover, those illiterates were unlikely to understand the value of the steel. Even if they did, the steel was far more valuable than they imagined. It was worth more than a duke, and he wouldn't hesitate to refuse such an exchange. Now is the time to discuss how to utilize the steel and dominate the region. What's it to you? Why so nosy? Liss rolled out of bed without any intention of washing his face, a habit long abandoned. He gargled his mouth with salt water from a bottle by the bed and spat it casually on the floor. In less than 10 seconds, he was all set, pushing aside Fin, who was blocking the doorway to his cabin, and entered the office area. The captain's cabin was split into 2 sections, a bedroom and an office area. Of course, Liss didn't really have any official duties to perform. He'd never even written a log. The job of recording their position, speed, and navigation decisions during voyages was handled by the extraordinarily talented Fin. All Liss had to do was name the destination, a hands-off captain. Fin looked at the mess in the captain's office. Liss was a complete slob who, nevertheless, loved collecting all sorts of oddities, curios, knives, musical instruments snatched from various nobles, piled up as if in a junkyard. Among these treasures, one could find some valuable items, potentially selling for dozens of golden dragons. "I don't understand why you're so obsessed with picking up trash." Fin picked a ring from the pile of disarrayed items. Its design was grotesquely extravagant, fashioned into a fierce tail-biting snake with the cheapest kind of fluorescent stones set into its eyes. Who in this day and age would still fall for such trickery? Passed off as expensive magic props, and with a bit of sleight of hand, they could scam a gullible fool for a high price. At best, this ring might sell for 10 copper coins. It doesn't cost anything, so why not pick it up if it's free? Liss pulled a flintlock gun from a drawer in his desk and slung it over his waist, adopting the airs of a captain. The accuracy of these guns was laughably poor since they lacked the technology to carve rifling into the barrels. Marksmanship had nothing to do with it. Hits relied entirely on metaphysics. With each shot requiring a reload, such a weapon was more of a novelty on the talent-rich Western continent, fired once to show respect. If someone was foolish enough to reload during a live duel, they'd be taken down instantly. Against the likes of Walman and Ox, the gun wouldn't even penetrate their armor. Back at Blue Bay Port, when Morrison had been cornered by Sea Marine No. 5 or 6 wielding smoothbore guns, Liss thought he was a dead man. But with the crack of his whip producing several arced phantoms, Morrison disarmed them all, and with a series of crossbow arrows from his left arm, he executed headshots on everyone. A whole arsenal at his disposal made him the optimal answer for any situation. The Iron Blood Warrior, also known as Little Killer, exemplified hitting beneath one's weight class. That's not to say the guns were completely useless. If they faced a well-trained firearms team, firing in volleys could bring about a qualitative change, one that ragtag militias couldn't withstand. A gun was worth a fair bit of money and was considered contraband. Liss carried it mainly for show-off. After all, he wasn't hurting for cash. "What do you want with me so early?" Liss sat swinging in his chair, quite unconcerned that he might tip over due to the momentum. Sign this. Fin handed over a list of crew assignments to Liss. Even on a pirate ship, there needed to be records and archives to manage finances properly. Many pirates never made it because, despite their bravery, they disbanded too soon due to uneven distribution of spoils and a mess of finances, causing severe internal strife. Liss knew that recruiting sailors meant dipping into the funds, and although the names were yet to be written, Fin wasn't the type to commit fraud or embezzle the public money. With the new rules in place, Liss feared nothing. A dozen or so guys would stick around till death. Liss quickly picked up a pen that seemed to be made from scab hair and signed his name with ink that had already begun to clump. You know, without well-endowed beauties, it doesn't feel like a different world. Can we recruit a few aboard? Sorry. Fin tucked away the list, knowing precisely what was on Liss' mind. Women can't be aboard the ship. As for the qualities you require, like collective strength, labor endurance, environmental tolerance, beauty, ample bosom, along with extensive combat experience, and fearlessness toward sailor harassment, all while paying attention to hygiene and dress sense, a well-rounded and dignified hexagonal lady like that seems to be quite rare. She would indeed be more of a hero unit. Liss gave up on the fantasy. If such a woman existed, she'd straight up be serving as an attendant to some night master, riding the expressway to promotion. In the morning, the rays of sunlight filtered into the cave, the sea's orange-red wave shimmering. Rain's face changed extremely fast. Just yesterday, he was eager to see Swan dead, and today he was already grinning, leaning on the railing beside Swan with the sea breeze blowing, chatting amiably. The stuff Swan had stolen was the real heavyweight, as if getting respiratory care from a heavyweight's mother, so damn heavy it could choke you. Swan was officially part of the crew now and wasn't as cautious about what he said. He spoke his mind, even delving into sensitive topics, as they gossiped about how the ship had gathered so many lunatics. When Rain talked about his own experience joining the ship, it was with a sense of nostalgia. That time, I had no money for a hostel and got kicked out at night. With nothing better to do, I was just wandering around. Out of the blue, a heavy rain started, and without a copper coin in my pocket, I was about ready to slip into depression, a fast track to a try not to laugh challenge. Rain started to brag without boundaries. I don't really get it. Swan looked confused. Rain waved his hand dismissively, took a drag from his cigarette, and continued. I figured I'd find somewhere to take shelter from the rain, so I turned into a deserted alley, thinking I'd just sit by someone's porch where the awning was big enough to keep me dry. Instead of finding a damn awning, I ran into 3 harbingers of doom. Liss, that's the captain, along with Shotti and Mika, were in the dark alley moving dead bodies. They stared straight at me, and I pretended I didn't see them, ready to turn and leave. That was 5 years ago. You wouldn't know it now to see him so quiet, but Shotti, that son of a gun, was fiery as hell back then, his every other word about killing someone's whole family. He was a butcher among butchers, an energetic young lad, you know? Without being cruel and ruthless, how could he paint such a picturesque world? He ordered me to roll on over, and I just exploded, having just been rolled out of a hostel, and now told to roll again. Rain was a natural storyteller as he vividly recounted his tale. At the major harbor of London City, the goal was to recruit legitimate sailors. One needed proof of one's background, and the checkpoints were quite strict. Many fugitives with a past, though, would spend money to find someone local to direct them to a secret port to mix among the pirates. In other words, below SS Fuma Catching Revenge was a talent market. Boss was directly hiring. Naturally, the sooner the sailors were ready, the better. Even though they had just thrown a share-out feast, this bunch efficiency still surprised Swan. Swan watched Shotti on the pier recruiting. At that moment, he was loudly hawking. Joining pirates and not becoming part of the BlackSail pirate group is like reading without looking at a Cania travelogue. It shows a lack of literary depth and personal cultivation, an inability to grasp the highbrow art of elegant simplicity, failing to penetrate its profound spiritual core. Stuck at that level, one can only live a relatively failed life. Shotti was repeating the classic lines used by Liss in the early days of recruiting for BlackSail. Surprisingly to Swan, a few people actually approached and started asking questions. Ox was sitting aside, scrutinizing them. Anyone old, weak, disabled, or sickly, or who hadn't mingled on a ship before, was outright rejected. Swan thought Shotti and Mika were among the few aboard with whom one could have a reasonable conversation. He hadn't expected Shotti to have had that kind of past and wondered if it was true, as all the tales were coming from Rain. Rain added, "I didn't care about all that. I was just enraged and coincidentally broke, so I might as well skin some folks for some money to spend. I walked straight over, ready to rob someone, and that's why Liss is the captain." He acted like a total goody-two-shoes, brother this and brother that, asking for help to take these bodies out to the sea and dump them, offering me a golden dragon. I was stunned. Such good fortune? Just move a couple of corpses, easy. Taking a closer look, I could tell these guys weren't easy to kill. If they could flaunt wealth, they must have had some skills. Figuring that, I agreed, but when I turned the corner, there were 10 more bloody corpses waiting. "I can't help with that," I said, but he insisted it was doable and told me to head to the nearby night market that was still open to borrow a unicycle. Rain took a deep drag on his cigarette, and even now he found the whole thing absurd. Swan was also seriously impressed. "A unicycle? Huh? Brilliant, just brilliant." Rain continued. "Liss shoved 5 silver coins in my hand, saying it was a deposit, and told me to bring it back as soon as I got it. I wasn't one to say no to free money, so I took it and walked off, never intending to borrow any damn unicycle. It was just ridiculous. I don't even know what I was thinking at the time, but as I walked, I figured 5 silver coins wouldn't last me many days anyway. Had a few drinks, stay in a hotel for a couple of nights, see a girl, and that's it gone. But damned if I didn't actually go borrow a unicycle and bring it back. Liss even threw in a gold coin, and that wasn't the end of it. He asked me to join him on a trip to the beach, saying the roads there were rough and an extra hand might be useful. He offered another gold coin for that. I fell for his wicked scheme. Might as well do him the full favor, I thought. So I handled all of it, pushing the thing through the woods, up hills, over several miles of bad road, until at last everything got dumped into the sea. With 2 gold coins pocketed, I planned to return the unicycle. 5 silver coins was no small amount when Liss kicked the damn thing into the ocean. He said that since I didn't return the unicycle and they had the deposit, they probably wouldn't go to the police, but if word got out, me being a big werewolf and all, I'd surely get pinned for those dozen-odd bodies that vanished into thin air. He suggested I might as well join his pirate gang. Fuck it. Rain stubbed out the cigarette and unceremoniously threw the butt into the sea. Swan tried his hardest to suppress his laughter with all his self-taught skills and managed to keep a straight face. After a long pause, he just said 2 words, "Sounds good." Rain smirked bitterly, about to talk about how Morrison came aboard in such a badass style, an entrance at his peak, and how he hasn't come down from that height even after more than a year, truly a damn hero sent from above. At that moment, Liss and Finn came up from the second deck to the first, and Liss immediately saw Rain and Swan in a lively conversation. Liss had nothing to say. He could read the minds of everyone on the ship. Rain truly had a talent for flipping faces like in Sichuan opera, one day ready to flay a man, the next instant cozying up to Swan after realizing his talent in theft could be quite refined. He scanned the deck and saw 2 brawny men greasing the sail ropes. To put it simply, in these times, whether you're a military master or a bandit, it's all about scraping by. Everyone's dead broke, and many ships don't even pay a salary. They just provide room and board. Migrants from inland towns were killing each other to get on board. But his ship was different. Not only did they serve broth with meat every day, but they also paid a naval wage of 8 silver coins a month from the East Shore Army, with a generous bonus on performance. It's the company of companies. We need to hire a few more kitchen hands, a sous chef. I can't do all this work by myself. Archer called out to 2 sailors on the pier while drinking his booze. "Where's Mika?" Liss turned around, saw everyone else was present. Shotti and Ox were recruiting, then asked Rain about the missing doctor. "At the brothel, I bet. Probably wants to take advantage of the quiet morning to get some, especially since we've just split the loot." He must be hitting the fanciest spot, Rain replied. Fun's face changed immediately, voiced his frustration. Didn't anyone stop him? We just set the rules. Liss thought Fin was being too sensitive. He pulled him aside and whispered, You can't watch him every day. Mika joined the ship even before you did. And after all these years, don't you trust him? No one's betraying you. I'll be heading into town with Fun. Anyone interested can sign up. Liss planned to check with the Adventurers Guild, gather some intelligence about the Thief Guild's moves, and while he was at it, buy a newspaper to see if there was any big news. After so many years in exile, he figured others must feel the same, that many must have perished in this chaotic world. Although it's a long shot, as long as there's a sliver of hope to find everyone, it would be best to, all together, take out that magician. As for going home, that was no longer a hope. I'm in. The alcohol here tastes like horse piss. Archer was in a state of confusion. He woke up to find that new rules had suddenly appeared on the ship. Run, and you leave your life behind, coupled with gemstones and some broken tablets. He had no idea what was going on. Archer, while not exactly charismatic, could also be described as the kind everyone loathed, even dogs. If Rain's rabies were logical, the result of playing out too many stale memes, of being obsessed with original God, then Archer was the genuine article, absolutely free of any preservatives, a native of the Western continent with raw stupidity, embodying emotionality, quick temper, poor situational awareness, stubbornness, showing off, all shortcomings rolled into one. What was most infuriating was that his looks weren't bad either. According to Western continent standards, he was a handsome man, the epitome of the tough outsiders from Hollywood westerns of the 60s, with a resolute face, sullen eyes, ready to pretend to be deep the moment someone disagreed, always with alcohol and cigarettes. I've changed my mind. I'm not going anymore. Fin lost all interest in going out as soon as he saw that Archer would be joining him. He'd initially planned to go into town to buy some supplies for his charms. However, he had this nagging feeling, like a thorn in his back, that he had forgotten something. His gaze shifted to Morrison. With half of his face disfigured, he was definitely one of the highest combatants on board, a threat that might not even have a known upper limit. He had never been drawn into a proper fight and had always ended battles almost instantaneously, in short durations, unpredictably like the Abyss. Like yesterday, those in charge of the bank weren't easy to handle. Daring to escort valuables amidst the chaos of Bima Duchy certainly meant they were tough. But his strange throwing knives were as powerful as grenades. His dual daggers had a ghostly, elusive presence, and his weird whips made him a veritable human meat grinder. Often called Little Killer, Morrison had no trouble eliminating a few aliens with ease. Following Fun's gaze, Liss sensed his thoughts. Brother Shaw was an oddball, not one to be judged by conventional standards. It wouldn't be surprising if he committed some outrageous act, like murdering everyone on board and fleeing. It was good for Fun to keep an eye on things, adding a bit of pressure to the others on the ship. Like it or not, Liss planned to find another scapegoat. Enduring Archer's company alone was just too miserable. Hey, if the captain says we go together. Come on, first officer. Why are you eyeing Morrison? Got something going on with him? I've completely forgotten about last night. Archer downed a few drinks, confused by the odd atmosphere on board first thing in the morning. Liss almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Low emotional intelligence. You're worried Morrison might betray us and flee. High emotional intelligence. I've forgotten all about last night. At that moment, Morrison was examining a matchlock gun, but he looked alertly over when he heard his name called. Fin clenched his fist. No, it's nothing. Let's go. I've changed my mind again. Fin thought Liss was right. You can't always keep a constant watch over everyone, and he had indeed been too tense. Covering all bases was never possible. One had to have the mindset of a gambler, where losing just means death, and that's that. Ox was here. This powerhouse fish could hold his own, reliable in a crisis, and Fin knew he was a level 1 fugitive with no place to hide, so there was no fear of him deserting. I'm coming too. As the quartermaster, Walman was undoubtedly the most idle person on board, his position nothing more than a figurehead. On a pirate ship, who would dare steal from the storage? Usually, they'd lose a hand first, then become fish food. You better rest up. There's no fighting involved in this trip to town, and with your size, we'd be lucky if someone didn't realize we're from the BlackSail pirate group. Liss flat out rejected the idea. Walman was quickly becoming a signature figure of the BlackSail, immediately associated with a black big when mentioned. His imposing figure, monstrous like a black lizard with a head full of sharp horns, was rather daunting, as depicted on the bounty order. Besides, Walman's race had a notoriously bad reputation, even extremely abhorrent. If one could credit Emperor Aaron with anything good, it was completely solving the issue of the alien race invasion from the southern wetlands, thoroughly suppressing them and declaring it an autonomous zone. This vast territory, comparable to a country in size, was the main habitat of the subdragon people, due to few suitable crops and a limited supply of edible animals in the marsh. When the population exceeded resources, they would fall into the Malthus trap, ultimately becoming bandits and invading neighboring countries. The wetland was rife with miasma, and the continuous drizzle made it difficult for human soldiers to march. More died in the march from fevers and poisonous vapors than in battle. Therefore, the place was impenetrable, yet they could launch attacks and withdraw at will, moving in and out freely. Every few years, there would be a major disturbance, forcing nations to bolster their border defenses, sacrificing large numbers of troops and resources. It was not until more than a decade ago that the Emperor's heavenly army descended that peace was restored. The Emperor's heavenly soldiers' intervention became one of the few pieces of propaganda capital for the Aaron Empire, constantly touting the Empire's heavenly might. The subdragon people were a race that nearly everyone wanted to attack, but when faced with them in reality, everyone preferred to go around them. Even though it has been peaceful for over 10 years, the shadow lingered. Not to mention the major rebellion a few years back, which was also suppressed, but the subdragon people had already been equated with evil races. Indeed, with your huge size, you better not get involved blindly, Archer grumbled. I'd like to sign up, Haywood said, having not spent much time in inland cities over the years. Heavenport was a very inclusive city, no matter where you were from. As long as you had money, you were a king. Haywood was actually tired of wandering around and rarely visited these continental cities. I'll call you Big Brother. Liss was dumbfounded. Haywood's demon identity had to be kept hidden. You have no business going there. Anyone can go except you. Just stay where it's cool on the ship. Bounty hunters, the Navy, and now the Thief Guild. A list of enemies growing everywhere. If they were to add in the bulls and snakes of the church court, this ship might as well rename itself SS Get Down, completely surrounded by enemies. Liss would rather provoke the most noxious thief guild than meddle with the religious forces of the Western continent that have been rooted for thousands of years. You might not realize what an ultimate madman someone would be if he believed that the Holy Spirit could have children through others. Liss often ridiculed the religion of the Western continent, saying that belief could enhance one's fighting spirit. But a religion talented in boasting self-consistent metaphysics could easily turn a person into an ultimate fanatic, entering blood rage. Turning charms into berserkers was no trouble at all. If a movement to eradicate superstition were to begin, it would be a death blow. Unfortunately, there actually were magicians and metaphysics here, so it wasn't feasible. On the Western continent, there are no priests in the traditional sense who could chant a spell and resurrect the living dead flesh and bones. If that were the case, the world would be at peace, and Mika's medical skills would be obsolete, fit only to be thrown into the sea as fish food. Perhaps such magic exists, but it would certainly be reserved for high-ranking priests, individuals of such stature that lesser characters could not hope to encounter in their lifetimes. The priests within the Adventurers Guild, which are essentially wild believers without church core credentials. Being able to apply a charm or two is already the limit. Understanding a couple of beneficial magic spells is considered top-notch talent. The priests of the church court, however, clad in heavy armor wielding nail head hammers with brains full of madness, are sinister figures who, when they come en masse to attack you, you have to ask yourself if you are afraid. All right, just the three of us, let's go. Liss went down the gangway, taking the opportunity to guide the process of hiring sailors. He didn't want to repeat the mistake of recruiting another strong man to lead a mutiny, like a toad skydiving. A terribly bold move. Originally, when recruiting sailors, Mika should have been present to check for any infectious diseases among these expendables and give them a certain degree of physical examination. But Mika was preoccupied with that matter since early morning, and at this time, the brothels hadn't even opened yet, busy with cleanliness. However, Ox knew very well about Mika's background. Over at East Shore, there were still quite a few decent schools, not to mention a big city like London City. And not all the students were from aristocratic families. Even if they had a bit of money at home, the hefty tuition required them to work and study. Female students couldn't do heavy manual labor, relying only on talent. At this very moment, Mika might be squatting around the school, supporting impoverished students. This time, just dividing the clean money alone amounted to 25 gold dragons. Once the stolen jewels were sold off through a channel, it would be another dozen or so shiny coins engraved with the eternal and time dragon symbol of Air National Church. Even if educated individuals with excellent grades and conduct demanded a higher price, copper coins wouldn't do the trick. It had to be silver coins. Mika would be able to have a blast. But having seen Mika conduct the inspection so many times, even a fool could have learned. Ox had his own methods. Those with obvious rashes or skin diseases didn't even need to be told. They could roll out immediately. Open your mouth. Ox was checking these expendables' teeth, tongue coating, and whether there were any lumps swollen on both sides of their necks. Although Ox didn't understand the principles, as long as there were no apparent problems, it was okay. Ox even went as far as to firmly squeeze these people's limbs to see if their muscles and bones were strong. Even the healthy ones screamed when squeezed, and the sick ones would faint on the spot. All right, you pass. Wait on the ship. The guy who looks like a dog will be your officer. He'll lead you to your quarters. 8 silver coins a month, the same as the Navy. Sometimes Admiral His Excellency might delay the military pay, but we won't. If that's fine by you, then get aboard. Keep your sign visible. Other pitiful ships don't offer this treatment, and you get meat every day. Tie your head to your belt tightly. Next. In fact, Ox was quite dissatisfied with the progress. With SS Fuma catching Revenge's size, considering the carpenters working in shifts around the clock, adding cooks and personnel ready for battle, and some miscellaneous positions, the ideal state was a crew of 115 sturdy sailors, preferably all battle-ready. But those who came for the interview were just too subpar. There were very few decent ones. If they were placed on the front lines of the Mirror Sea Alliance, they'd probably all get chopped down on the first day. The bustling crowd on the secret port pier had already come early to make a living. Most were desperate individuals who, in their desperation, decided to become pirates. Mostly malnourished, with sallow complexions and thin muscles. Their clothes were ragged, and they lacked experience at sea, necessitating further training. Time had passed, and Ox had reluctantly picked only 3 strong and experienced ones. At this rate, one could hardly tell when they'd be able to set sail. What kind of work did you do before? Shotti looked at a guy who came for the interview. I don't know if gambling in a casino counts, sometimes managing to win a bit back. Just last night, I went to the usual casino, but for some reason, it was shut down, so I'm considering looking for a job. A young man, just over 20, replied seriously. Shotti regarded him solemnly. It turned out that gambling was also a way to make a living. Get lost. Ox had no time for nonsense. What a bunch of cavemen. After disembarking, Liss, who came to inspect the work, also noticed the difficulty of the project's progress. It seemed that under the benevolence of the current king of BMA, the conditions in the inland towns were even more challenging. As for this bunch of famished men at the docks, one couldn't even talk about their combat ability. Even their labor force was questionable. Annoying, I'll go to the city to find a headhunting consultant to pull people in. Liss didn't want a ship full of weaklings either. Not to mention waylaying others, the ship wouldn't get to Heavenport without exhausting dozens of people. Headhunting consultant? Ox didn't understand, but Liss always had a way with extravagant terminology. So, a middleman, an intelligence broker, recruiting some pirates who already had a structure in place. Liss was planning to find BMA Kingdom once this big deal was finished, whether it panned out or not, but a recommendation letter would certainly be more reliable. Mr. Chai loved to collect guests. The more impressive, the better. If Mr. Chai saw this ragtag bunch, how embarrassing would that be? You might just get brushed off with a hero's dismissal, so you'd have to put Mr. Chai in his place a bit. Now, Liss is feeling on top of the world, with money on the ship, tough guys, and an immeasurable future ahead. How about you all stop clinging to your crappy ship and come aboard mine? Every month you'll have a salary and meat to eat, and the share of the spoils will surely be much higher than what your junk ship offers. Liss was as arrogant as can be, bellowing at the crew members on several nearby pirate ships. Indeed, some people were tempted, but still, nobody paid Liss any mind. They were all from the same world. Switching ships wasn't an easy decision, as reputations were at stake. Many looked at him with unfriendly eyes, but didn't dare to say anything. In the East Shore area, Liss had been making a name for himself for 4 or 5 years and was now a local figure of some renown, lately even making waves in both the lawful and criminal worlds. You forgot about over 20 days ago, slaughtering until my hands ached. Looking for a middleman to recruit people is one thing, but it should be individuals, not whole groups with existing ties. Ox didn't want to make the same mistake again. Right? Liss patted his head. You keep recruiting. If you're tired, switch with Walman and Rain. Those two are the laziest, damn. Liss' gaze turned to Fun, when suddenly a light bulb went off in his head, and he said, I knew we were missing something. The ship's all about physical damage. We need some magical damage. Fun replied, strictly speaking, there isn't such a division. Fun thought Liss had been reading too many fanciful adventure biographies, romantic tales fabricated by the Adventurers Guild to entice registrations. Damage type, what a load of nonsense. The skill level of those traveling wizards and swindlers from the Adventurers Guild was laughable compared to their own. Everything in the world has a fundamental starting point, both on the surface level of physics and the deeper logical aspects, leading to the same endpoint. Magic techniques were merely methods of resonating with this starting point through certain elements to manifest power, adhering to a set of objective principles. Some magicians understood the tricks of the trade well enough to control a single element, but Fun was different. Aside from her expertise in necromancy, she mastered all elemental spells. She had yet to show off all her abilities, and even at the Pedin National Arcane Academy, if she hadn't gotten into trouble, her portrait would be hanging in the hall for alumni to admire. You got a lot of friends, a wide network, right? You know people in the Thief Guild, that school of yours, and the Warlock Alliance you joined. What's it called again? Something Tower Alliance. Get some proficient magicians over here. Liss remembered this detail. Among the illiterate fugitives on the ship who had connections. Even if they knew someone, it was likely fellow brutes from jail, not high in talent. Business was getting bigger, and brute force alone wasn't enough. They needed brains, and that meant relying on general Fun, my proudest conviction. Fun looked at Liss as if looking at an idiot and calmly said, do you think a person who has received higher education, with a luxurious home, a noble's daughter for a lover, a court mage's status, also a baron's title, a pillar against religious forces, and also a top talent of the Academic Tower Alliance, would come to a pirate ship, endure 10 days to half a month without bathing among desperados from all over the world, drift aimlessly with blood on every penny they earn, and descend into self-degradation with cheap liquor and vulgar company? Faced with Fun's question, after thinking for a while, Liss replied, aren't you just that? Even Fun couldn't help but swear. Aye. Fun drew her sword, ready to chop someone. Easy there, first officer. This is mutiny. Archer intervened. If you have business in town, hurry it up. You're scaring everyone away. Pressing a hand to his forehead in exasperation, Shotti decided to even recruit some dark elf brothers himself. The old BlackSail didn't care. Anyone who could work was welcome aboard, but after last night, things were different. They needed elites. Without some tough guys, they couldn't protect the treasures Swan had brought. The riffraff from the Thief Guild were no easy targets, fouler than sludge and sneaky in every conceivable way. London City Adventurers Guild. As an NGO spread across multiple countries, its operations required a significant endorsement of credibility, as well as a terrifying amount of financial power. Naturally, there's no need to elaborate on the facade of the building. Whether it was the design, the materials, or the construction, all were extremely exquisite, especially the Adventurers Guild in a major city. The sun was high in the sky, but the monsoon cold current offered no warmth. The colossal building, clad in pure white and laced with natural marble veins, stood proudly within the inner ring of London City. It occupied a considerable area, and even in the costly London City, it boasted a garden square, complete with fountains adorned by noble statues of adventurers that seemed to narrate legendary tales of slaying evil dragons and conquering sea demons. They inspired a yearning for adventure. Even though some of the adventurers coming and going were of questionable character, the staff always kept an eye out to ensure cleanliness, and the square, paved with stone bricks, was exceptionally tidy, a completely different world from the slums of London City's outer ring, where houses were crammed together. The most mixed and chaotic place in a city was undoubtedly here, where adventurers, spies, criminal organizations, and even officials all liked to mingle. The guild couldn't manage what happened outside the building. In some sense, the Adventurers Guild served as the most legitimate and upright trading platform on the Western continent. Liss and his two companions were very low-key, all wearing hats, not wanting to be recognized. Many adventurers were also part-time bounty hunters, and though the deal with the sheriff still stood, others didn't know. Recognize you, flip through the bounty order, and they'd slash you without a second thought. On the way over, Archer had also cleared his thoughts, exclaiming that the Tiger Man will forever be divine, if BlackSail really rose to power this time. Finn planned to issue a quest at the guild to collect the casting materials he needed, as well as some items for research into necromancy. He had other legitimate tasks to tend to and couldn't afford to waste time running errands. As long as you deposited the money with the Adventurers Guild, these procurement services were something that those bored-to-death adventurers would pounce on like crazy dogs. There was no risk involved, just running errands for a little profit margin. The guild also earned a small commission, saving oneself the trouble and making everyone happy. The trio looked down on these adventurers, and they were not the only ones. Becoming an adventurer was widely recognized as a dead-end job. According to Rain, most of them were con artists with no real skills and delusions of grandeur, never knowing when they might die over something absurd. In List's view, those who went on quests to hunt magic beasts or escort merchant caravans were only asking for trouble. If you're going to risk your life, then you need to go all in. What use was that little bit of hiring gold? However, everyone has their own aspirations. You can't meddle if someone just wants to earn an honest and honorable living. Sometimes Liss wondered, if he hadn't been driven into a corner, perhaps he too might have become an adventurer in this world. Newcomers, silver, gold, honor, heroic, and hall level. The guild differentiated various hierarchies with 6 titles, assigning appropriate quests. But 80% of people were forever stuck rotating between newcomer and silver, with no prospects whatsoever. Only the rare high-level adventurers who made a name for themselves received vigorous support and priority from the guild. They were all tasks with handsome rewards. But when there was no work, they still had to dutifully serve as guests for the noble masters, though at least they needed a gold title as a foot in the door. Speaking of which, wasn't Rain part of an adventure group before? As the trio arrived at the location, Archer started to gossip. Yeah, don't let his dumbass appearance fool you. His adventure group used to be quite famous. Liss recalled that night with the unicycle, pondering how Rain ended up in such straits today. Truly a tragedy. If I remember correctly, it was called the Starving Wolf Adventure Group, right? Its members were all werewolves, and it was an honorable level adventure group. Finn added that reaching honor level meant one could be considered an official member of the guild and could even participate in some internal affairs, surmounting 95% of the miscellaneous groups. Honor level? How come I didn't know about that? That's impressive. Archer was utterly amazed, his worldview overturned. Was Rain, of all people, really part of an honorable level adventure group? An honorable level adventure? But It was their leader who was extraordinary, not Rain. If Rain had that capability, why would he mess around as a pirate? Liss was griping when Aaron had such a tough time taking down a naval officer, and there was Ox killing him with a single strike. What was there to even talk about? Was Aaron kicked out or what? Archer didn't get it either. Honorable level, that was quite the achievement. Why would anyone decent become a pirate? Sure, the earnings might be better, but what kind of singer's life was that, where you could only spend money in the far-flung Heavenport? It was too damn much. Let me just say this isn't something Aaron spilled himself. And don't go all neurotic on me. Try to confirm it with him. I got this through the grapevine. Liss then lit up a cigarette and began to puff away. The biggest slacker bunch on the Western continent were the adventurers. They had no real business to attend to. They were the main gossips of the continent, spreading every little detail, from which heroic-level adventurer slept with which woman. Just how idle could these guys get? You gonna spill it, or what? Archer took a few swigs of his drink. What's with the suspense? For that big mouth of yours not to go blabbing. 10 silver coins. Liss was asking for a fortune. Why the hell don't you just go rob someone? Archer clammed up, but he hadn't walked far before he really couldn't hold back anymore and dug out 10 silver coins. Finn pushed Archer's hand back. There were things weighing on Aaron, the reason why he mixed with pirates. It wasn't just the bounty hunters after him, but other matters as well. Besides, Liss had been rather callous, considering Archer, the always hazy drunk, was the last person to find out. Before Swan boarded the ship, he'd asked about everyone's background. All knew much earlier than he did. The Starving Wolf Adventure Group's last mission was to escort goods for a great noble with territory in the Aaron Empire. The leader and other members died, leaving only 2 vice leaders. One became a pirate, you know who, while the other is now a servant to the nether flame of the Aaron Imperial Guard. The goods were meant as a birthday gift for the Minister of Aaron, valued at no less than 8,000 golden dragons. The current story is Aaron swallowed all the goods and fled overseas. Any adventurer's guild on the continent, with members around for a while, would somewhat know of this. As for what exactly happened, no one knows, but it's possible that the cargo contained not just money, but other significantly important items. Finn explained all this to Archer. 8,000 golden dragons. Archer's jaw nearly dropped to the ground. It was a damn fortune. Even if you raided Admiral Castle in London City now and seized everything, it was still questionable whether you'd find that amount. At least when I met him, forget 8,000 golden dragons, the guy couldn't even afford to stay at an inn. A truly tragic figure loaded with blames. Don't go asking around like a nervous wreck. He probably doesn't even know the full story himself. And even if he does, he's not likely to tell you. Liss added, I'm off to take care of some guild business. You do your thing. Without looking back, Finn dove into the bustling crowd at the Adventurers Guild. Liss was looking for an information peddler to get the lowdown on the Thief Guild's news and to recruit some reliable hands in a BlackSail. A freckled newsboy, just past 10 years old, was selling newspapers. Hit me with a copy. Liss took out a copper coin and got himself a paper. Any big news? Archer found a bench, sat down, and continued drinking. Damn it, big trouble. Liss' expression completely froze as he looked at the front page of the newspaper. Since the Northern Prison Riot, 10 years had passed. Those who were confined in that relentless cold of eternal night frost were not only the unfortunate souls sentenced to hard labor, but also notorious criminals whose names could silence crying children. And even more so, the notorious old guns from the underground world of the Western continent. Terror Sanctum, also known as Little Northern Prison, due to its branching out into 2 new disciplines for many students from the Magic Medicine Department, New Pharmacology and New Trauma Science. The progress in medicine on the Western continent owed its greatest achievements to the prisoners within these walls. It was hard to imagine how, even without steam engines and lacking precise instruments, they managed to conceptualize nerves, endocrine systems, immune functions, and even genetic concepts through sheer exhaustive methods, using the most brutal means of trial and error. Of course, the so-called genes differed vastly from the modern understanding, often serving more to bolster the lineage narratives of the ruling classes of the Western continent. All the medicines, lacking any foundational logic or principles of pathology, were discovered through a method of trial and error, screening patients with similar symptoms and then eventually compiled into a comprehensive medical encyclopedia. Of course, the desperately poor peasants still resorted to the old, dark methods of consulting almanacs, bloodletting, and drinking holy water, while the cutting-edge medical standards suitable for nobles and wealthy merchants, with tablets and even antibiotics derived from plant extracts, had reached the level of the early 20th century in terms of treatment success rates. It had to be said that Mika's family had great foresight in recognizing the trend of the times, spending a fortune on hiring female home tutors from new pharmacology and new trauma science, enabling Mika to earn respect as a scholar in the local community despite lacking formal academic credentials, even managing to hold a decent official position within the Aran Empire, where officials were known for their corruption. Unfortunately, life is unpredictable, and Mika ended up in such a situation. When Liss had nearly died from an axe wound to the head and first met Mika, he was shocked by the level of medical knowledge in this world still lit by oil lamps and candles. Mika knew the concept of iodine, even its preparation methods. He mentioned it was extracted from seaweed using solvents from new pharmacology, effective for disinfecting wounds and preventing infections. Liss was utterly astounded. Mika was a top-notch talent, a must-have for their team. And now, the shock Liss felt reading this newspaper was akin to when Mika first introduced iodine, 10 years after the Northern Prison Riot. If not according to the St. Aaron calendar, but using the 12-month calendar, it would be more than 13 years. Liss could never have imagined that he would meet a former schoolmate again in such a way, heralding the dawn of a new era. The school Liss attended, where he and other students visited a research institute together, mostly comprised engineering students, meaning they possess strong practical application skills. "What kind of major news has turned you into an idiot?" Archer asked, seeing Liss sweat profusely for the first time since they were chased by several naval ships. Reeking of alcohol, he leaned in to look at the newspaper. A carriage that runs on iron rails, without horses? Archer, looking at the front page of the newspaper, was also extremely puzzled. The copy indeed described it as such, a horseless carriage. But is there a horse? A carriage, does it have horses? A carriage, not pulled by horses. How can it still be called a carriage? This brought a hearty laugh out of Archer, drinking his spirits and thoroughly enjoying the absurd information as a delightful accompaniment to his drink. The newspaper's editor should quit their job. He could do better while high. It was such nonsense. Only Liss understood the gravity of the situation. Due to the lack of photography and limitations in printing technology, the newspaper published by the Adventurers Guild contained no photos, just simple but expressive line drawings by professional artists, who were of a legendary caliber, almost 99% accurate, whether capturing people's portraits or other images. If not for the accompanying text, Liss might not have connected the drawing on the front page to his former classmate. It wasn't strange to see someone who looked highly similar, but with the mention of the steam train, it was a certainty. Creating a steam train wasn't as simple as understanding the basic principles of combustion engines. It involved the technology of steelmaking and the ability to manufacture components like steam cylinders and bearings in a workshop. The mathematical models also included boiler heated surface area, the coefficient of adhesion between wheels and tracks, and a relationship between adhesion traction. Even with many theoretical elements complete, it was only possible to theoretically manage freight and passenger transport. Because of dealings with religious and conservative forces on the Western continent, various interests entangled, and party struggles, it was countless times more difficult to obtain funding than all the academic conditions mentioned above. To actually invest labor in production and operation was not on the same dimension as just having a brainstorm. Liss also understood the reason. Century News. The world's first railway has been put into use. A freight train from Aran Imperial City to Chintzy Port has departed and successfully returned. How does a horseless carriage run? The front page news also introduced various advantages of the train, but there was no introduction to any driving principle. It was all about creating momentum for the Aran Empire. The most ridiculous part is that the train needed the blessing of the Eternal and Time Dragon to run properly. In any case, the imperial might was unmatched. There were also portraits of two train operators. One was a former classmate of his, and the other was a face he had seen in the northern prison and could never forget, the apprentice of that formidable magician. Liss fully realized that he was not considering hunting anymore. During his time in the big prison, what that magician did was not like this, even knowing that these people from different planes had relatively fresh knowledge. The magician's capabilities were unimaginable. In that great soul summoning, not only people from Earth participated, many came from other dimensional planes as well. There was only one possibility. He had turned traitor and would help the magician hunt down these few hundred people to achieve the magician's undisclosed, sinister purpose. If there truly were personified gods, the magician's skills could definitely be considered divine. Liss hated that when he was studying in North America, he had spent his time either playing games or glory for the country, intensely engaging with local female college students and beach bikini beauties. Moreover, his specialty in applied optics was too niche and cutting edge. In this place, it hardly shone at all. However, it wasn't entirely useless. With a spare parts workshop, he could actually put together a camera. But who on the Western continent cares for photography? If he developed a camera with high-definition crime archives, the fugitive pirates at Heavenport would find him and hang him publicly as a warning to all. Because of his long time mingling in tough circles, what Liss hated most were traitors and snitches. If he met this person again, he definitely wouldn't reminisce about their old school days. He would greet him straight to the head with the frost rhododendron blood crying. Thinking about it carefully, this seemed like a student unexposed to the world with low psychological endurance, who could be forced to do anything under torture. But thinking more deeply, this guy was now also over 30 years old. Straight to the Noxus guillotine with the frost rhododendron blood crying, not until 5 cuts accumulate full blood rage, then a fierce stab. You've made it big, now a court astrologer, train operator, a big shot. Liss tore the newspaper in half, and then crumpled it into a ball. Archer knew that Liss could be a bit neurotic sometimes, and didn't mind it. Still drinking here? In a few days nukes will be flying over. Liss snatched Archer's bottle and threw it on the floor, smashing it to pieces. But Archer was already deep into his cycle of cooking, killing, drinking, and sleeping, and he was already quite drunk. Ah, what nuke? Brother Shah is here. A single slash and it's done. What's to worry about? Archer was now so drunk that he started belching. Liss was speechless. Brother Shah might really not be able to handle this stuff, and who knows if the Netherworld steel could hold up. But producing it in a few days was a bit exaggerated. These college students were just playing around. They couldn't churn out anything more impressive, even if there were geniuses in the Research Institute and indeed able to mobilize massive resources, survey and manufacture mining cars, various supporting projects piled up. Even with many charms combined, it would still take at least 10 or 20 years. Damn, it's really changing times, must find a solid backer quickly. Liss, originally not very interested in the major projects of Lord London City, began to hope for a successful push. No matter what, he must find a major power to cling to and climb up. Finn finished his business and stepped out of the Adventurers Guild's main entrance. What's wrong? Is there some big issue? Seeing Liss's anxious state, Finn couldn't help but wonder. Liss was the tough guy who didn't even frown when surrounded by a dozen pirates at Heavenport. Now, sitting in a chair, shaking his leg while smoking, his gaze unfocused and daydreaming, was extremely rare for him. The last time this happened was when his secret meeting with the daughter of a big shot at Heavenport was discovered. At Finn's words, Liss stubbed out his cigarette. Did you buy a newspaper? Liss intended to seek Finn's counsel. Having mingled in the upper echelons of the Western continent, he was more aware of the impacts brought about by the operation of steam trains. Are you talking about the steam train affair? I heard adventurers inside discussing it. A friend of mine also thought of this invention, but didn't publish his thesis due to the circumstances. Besides, he had no good ideas for precision molds for iron or processing. I didn't expect it to actually come to fruition now, with a blessing from Eternal and Time Dragon. That's a bit far-fetched. Fin didn't take it seriously, although he was slightly regretful. That friend was actually himself. He simply enjoyed his obsession with magic techniques more than his inventions. Liss fell silent for a moment, then slapped his forehead. Indeed, it was just a steam train. Having mixed with pirates for too long, his brain had become rusty. It didn't represent much, after all. Upon careful consideration, it was merely a slight advancement in transportation. And it was still a long way from widespread application. It had just started operating on a single route. The Western continent was much larger than the combined size of the 7 continents and was far from being flat and unobstructed, with dangerous chasms, high peaks, and no-go zones rife with creatures. It was hard to say how many years building the infrastructure would take. He just wondered what else that traitor could come up with. "Are you so troubled over this matter?" Fin was perplexed, then added, "I actually have a good idea. Soon, ideally within half a year, we should also make a trip to the Aran Empire to try our luck. Since the freight train has just started, it's possible they will test passenger service on that track. The first batch to try it out will certainly be nobles eager for something new. We could rob them." Fin stroked his chin, thinking it was a good idea. They had to act before anyone else thought of it. Liss pulled a face as if he had swallowed a fly. General Fin was such a clever man. How could he suddenly become so idiotic? "How are we going to rob them? A bunch of us, over a dozen, are wanted criminals. How do we get on the train? Are we supposed to chase it? Outrun the train?" Liss suddenly became trapped by a modern way of thinking. Fin looked as if he had swallowed a fly. Liss was such a clever man. How could he suddenly become so idiotic? "Perhaps we can have Ox, that monster power fish, carry some extra stones, the kind that weighs 700 or 800 pounds. We could block the railroad, force the train to stop somewhere remote where the soldiers can't reach it quickly. We'll rob everyone on the train, kill those who need killing. It would be perfect to kidnap a few great nobles for ransom. The money we would make from this, I can scarcely imagine." Fin, too, fell into the fixed mindset of a pirate. Hard to imagine he, too, was once a noble. You've awakened the dreamer with a single phrase. Listening to you is better than 10 years of reading. Liss saw the light all at once. He truly was not unworthy of being General Fin. His idea, even cleverer than making a triple profit off a single bet at the casino. Fin also bought a newspaper from a newsboy and studied it carefully, planning to take it back to the ship to give those illiterates a lesson. Mixing with pirates had many disadvantages. Being cut off from news was one of the biggest. Once, they had snatched a great haul, making a profit of more than 900 golden dragons. The crew spent almost half a year in Heavenport, indulging in all vices and investing in some properties, foolishly spending all the money they would need for the rest of their lives. They had nearly worn themselves out, and by the time they returned to the Western continent, the climate and landscape had changed entirely. As Fin read the newspaper, aside from the steam train matter, it was mostly about recent murders on the East Shore, where all the victims were tiger people. The officials suspected a psychopath who hated the Tiger Man race, when in reality, it was a major case pinned on Swan's back. Another point of interest was a recent event in the northern part of BMA Duchy, where an honor-level adventure group had killed a necromancer. Fin had once had a brief acquaintance with this necromancer during his time with the Tower Alliance. Truly, life was unpredictable. The rest of the news was just gossip among adventurers, like which heroic level had confirmed a relationship with which woman, sleeping together, all written by brainless editors with nothing better to report. It was impossible to find any news about refugees or famine in the newspaper. These were printed by the Adventurers Guild and wouldn't mention local politics. On someone else's turf, it was best to pay taxes and conduct business honestly. At the moment Fin closed the newspaper. Captain, you're here too? I have something to tell you." An informant with shifty eyes spotted the drunk, wailing like a crying bomb archer, and happened to recognize Liss, approaching enthusiastically. About a dozen days earlier, when Liss had come ashore, it was this guy he sought out to inquire about the recent situation on the East Shore in London City, and whether there were any pirates competing with Liss for business. Liss also noticed the man, somewhat familiar, but still took a while before he remembered. "Oh, it's you, speak quickly." Liss had initially planned to inquire about the Thief Guild, but after giving it some thought, he decided against it. These informants played both sides, and if he went asking around, it might instead draw attention. The Thief Guild probably hadn't traced things back to BlackSail yet. Otherwise, they wouldn't be searching all over the East Shore. When their people arrived in London City and asked these informants if anyone had been inquiring about them, that would be damn disastrous. It was enough to know from the newspapers that the Thief Guild was still murdering people. Blue Bay Port had been involved in Swan's racket, but he hadn't shown his face. The biggest clue at the moment was whether they could find a connection between Swan and Fun. The Thief Guild's intelligence capabilities were much stronger than those of the Adventurers Guild, so it was only a matter of time before they found out and tracked down BlackSail, as Fun was officially recognized as the first officer of BlackSail. Do you still need people on your ship? I can introduce someone to you. The informant squeezed out a smile, professional etiquette for someone who makes a living by their words. Despite being dressed in tatters, he paid great attention to oral hygiene. Oh, Liss was intrigued. It was a big taboo for informants to make money from both parties at once. As long as one party paid, that should suffice. It seemed like someone desperate to set sail, trying to wrap things up quickly with the informant, perhaps a troublemaker with a lawsuit over their head. No need. Liss declined, figuring the person might just end up as another passenger on the ship, which was uninteresting. Besides, there were treasures on board, and those with major cases to answer for should stay as far away as possible. Captain, about that person. The informant looked around, then lowered his voice to Liss. That person is offering 5 golden dragons, just to take him and his brothers on board, and he's even willing to pay you for it. Liss was taken aback at this. That was even more reason not to accept. Bringing a whole group of brothers along raised suspicions of being sent by the Thief Guild to take out people like him. Fun also became vigilant. Where are they? Take me to see them. Better safe than sorry. Fun decided to take preemptive action. Common thieves were no match for someone like him. Liss caught on to Fun's thoughts, grabbed the informant by the collar, and smirked. The entire BlackSail crew was at the secret port, and Morrison was not one to be trifled with. Are you explicitly saying they're from BlackSail? Liss prepared to strip this informant bare later on. Sir, I've been wronged. The informant knew that Liss and his crew of desperados didn't hesitate to kill people in the streets. Fearing he had touched a nerve, he had been cautious with his words. It was against his professional ethics to reveal his employer's information, but now he spilled everything. Those people were formerly military masters. The leader is a knight, tasked with protecting the son of a high official from the Aran Empire coming to Bima Duchy for business. But that young master had a heart condition and suddenly died of a serious illness on the way. They failed their mission and have fled here. Liss could tell from the informant's demeanor that he wasn't making it up. Shall we go take a look? Liss asked Fun for advice. Fun nodded and added to the informant, You'd better think carefully. You've come clean halfway through, and if things are as you say when we get there, you might just walk away with your life. But if we reach the place and something's off, you know what will happen to you.